Welcome, summoner. Come rest along the hilltop. The bamboo around us leans close in the darkness, whispering as the night wind threads through each hollow stalk, while far away, a temple bell marks the slow passing of an hour that no one will ever see again. In a world as wide as Runeterra, evil does not always arrive with claws bared and teeth dripping. Sometimes it comes in the shape of duty. Sometimes it wears the mask of honor. Sometimes the most terrible monster in a life is a single choice that cannot be taken back. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Two brothers, one murder, one unforgivable lie. You think you know this story, do you not? Yasuo, the traitor who abandoned his post. Yone, the righteous hunter who tracked him across Ionia. A fatal duel in the rain, a body cooling on the stones, and a wind-scarred swordsman walking alone into the night. Those are the pieces the game gives you. They are not the whole truth. Beneath the familiar splash art and the sharp lines of their steel, there is another story, slower and sadder, about a strict childhood and a war that pressed in from Noxus, about a gifted student who could command the breeze itself, and an older brother who tried and failed to keep him tethered to the path. We will walk through the courtyard where Yasuo first bent the wind to his will, and we will stand the night Elder Suma fell, when a single gust became a death sentence. We will feel the weight of an accusation built on logic and on fear, the way an entire order of warriors turned as one and pointed to the only boy who could have killed by air alone. Together, we will wander through years of pursuit, through Yone's rigid devotion to a code that left no room for doubt, through the moment brother met brother with naked steel, and neither could step aside. And when Yone dies, his story does not end. In the half-lit spaces between life and the spirit realm, another kind of horror waits. An Azakana, born from buried resentment, ready to bind itself to a soul that it cannot forgive. Now the night is long, so let us begin. You do not need to remember every name, every temple, every shifting alliance of this world. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. Simply follow the line between two brothers. Through love, through betrayal, through suffering, until we reach the place where the lie was first told, and the place where it finally breaks. Runeterra, after dark. Where swords remember to follow that line, we have to step back from the brothers themselves and look at the ground beneath their feet. In a world as wide as Runeterra, no tragedy is truly alone. Every duel has an echo. Every grave has neighbors. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and imagine the map of this world not as ink on parchment, but as scars on ancient skin. Empires have risen and broken here under cold, indifferent stars. Shurima's sun-baked monuments, half swallowed by sand. Camavor's rusting armor beneath black waves. Noxian banners, rotting on 100 foreign hills. Between them lie the quiet places, where no armies march anymore. Yet the soil still remembers the weight of steel. Ionia is one of those places. But it is stranger than most. It is not simply a land. It is a conversation between root and river, shrine and shadow, mortal breath and the spirits that listen. In Ionia, the boundary between the living path and the unseen road is thin as a sword edge. A blade stroke in the material world carves a bright line through the spirit realm. A promise whispered under a cherry tree is heard by things that do not sleep. You can walk through an Ionian forest and never see a single ghost, and still be watched by 1,000. Moss hides spearheads from invasions long forgotten by men, yet perfectly remembered by the land. Under the roots, steel sleeps. Above, wind moves through leaves that once shook with war cries. The horror here is not loud. It is patient. It is the knowledge that your intent, your oath, your moment of weakness will not simply pass. It will leave a stain that spirits trace like old ink. When Noxus came with its machines and its measured cruelty, it did not just burn villages. It tore the veil. Each catapult stone, each ordered atrocity, rang out in the unseen like a cracked bell. Ionia answered with monks, with assassins, with children pressed too early into the shape of warriors. Yasuo and Yone were only 2 such children, standing in a river of older wars, older invasions, older moral fractures that had already split this world along lines of duty and shame. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, and the brother's path runs through a district where honor itself becomes a kind of monster. In Ionia, a broken oath can be more dangerous than a drawn bow. A single step away from your assigned duty can echo louder than a battlefield of corpses. Is it any wonder that when Yasuo abandoned his post, the land itself seemed to turn against him? Even the wind is not innocent here. The same currents that carried Elder Suma's legendary technique now curl around forgotten graves, listening. Wind in Ionia is a weapon, but also a witness. It remembers whose blood it carried, whose last breath it stole, whose whispered regret it bore to the trees. So when 2 brothers learn to wield wind and steel, it feels less like a choice and more like a sentence. Together, we will wander through that sentence soon. The night of the murder, the hunt, the duel where one brother falls and the other walks away with a wound no healer can see. By the end, you will know who struck which blow, yes, but more importantly, you will see how a culture's idea of honor, sharpened by centuries of war and watched by tireless spirits, can be more lethal than any sword and far harder to lay down. 2 brothers in the dark, a story you only think you know. So let us step closer to that wound while we still keep some of the bandages on. Yasuo is the easier brother to name because the wind itself already whispers him to you. The prodigy who could command the air with a single cut. The student Elder Suma, favored, loved for his potential, and mistrusted for his pride. With a temper as sharp as his blade, and a restlessness that did not fit inside temple walls. He was the one who broke formation, who asked why, when others only bowed. Yone was the elder shadow beside that storm. Where Yasuo cut corners, Yone traced every line. The brother of quiet discipline, who followed the rules, believed in Ionia's codes, and carried the weight of family honor like a second sword across his back. If Yasuo was the gust that rattled the paper doors, Yone was the hand that slid them shut again, patient, precise, unbending. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you need both kinds of men to stand a gate. You do not need to remember every name in their village, every date of every skirmish, every general in the Noxian war machine. What matters is this: the drums of invasion were growing louder. Ionia's tranquil gardens were learning the taste of iron, and 2 brothers who once trained side by side began to feel the ground shift under their feet. One leaned into the storm. One clung tighter to the old stones. When Noxus finally came, Yasuo made a choice. He abandoned his post, believing that only his wind could shield Elder Suma from the approaching horror. But the Elder was found already dead, cut down by the very technique only Yasuo had mastered. A death that should not have happened. A lie that everyone believed. In the stunned silence that followed, intent did not matter, only appearance. And the prodigy became a monster in the eyes of his own order. Yone took up the hunt, not because he hated his brother, but because he could not imagine a world where duty bent for blood. For years he followed Yasuo's shadow through ruined fields and quiet villages, until that pursuit hardened into something colder, sharper, harder to put down than a sword. When they finally met, it was not in a council chamber, but in an open field, and the infamous duel ended with Yasuo's blade through his brother's heart. One murder, one unforgivable wound, a death that should not have happened. Yet Yone's story did not end in that red-stained grass. Somewhere between breath and oblivion, an Azakana found him. He killed the demon, but its mask clung to his face, and he woke again in the night as a man who hunts demons, carrying the truth like a hidden scar. Together, we will wander closer to that truth soon. For now, simply hold the feeling of two lives twisting around one terrible misunderstanding, while we allow the night to grow a little deeper. How to listen to a ghost story. So before we follow those twisting lives any further, we should decide how you are going to walk with them. This is not a tale you sprint through. This is something you let wash over you, the way you listen to rain on a roof you will never see, counting the drops until you forget to count at all. Do not treat this as a test you must pass, or a ledger of every sword stroke and every whispered accusation. Treat it as a nighttime storytelling session, the kind that lives at the edge of sleep, when the world is small and the shadows on the wall are taller than any emperor. You may close your eyes if you wish. You may drift a little. The story will still find you. If a name slips away, let it go. If a detail blurs, do not chase it. Let the facts of Ionia's war with Noxus, the titles of elders, and the dates of invasions fall through your fingers like sand, or roll away like beads from a broken string. What matters is the feeling of a boy who abandons his post because his intent is to save his master, and the weight of a brother who cannot forgive that choice. The emotional current will carry you, even when the surface ripples are lost to the dark. Our pace will be deliberate and meditative, like walking through an overgrown temple at dusk. You will pause with me at each carved relief. Two children training in the courtyard. A wind technique only one can master. A corpse found with no wounds but the mark of the storm. We will linger on these images until they are almost too quiet to be called horror. And yet, they will still hurt. In a world as wide as Runeterra, stories rarely move in straight lines. This one, least of all. We will move back and forth between past and present, between the mortal battlefields where Noxian steel bites into Ionian soil, and the spirit realm where Azakana circle like patient birds of prey. That is not confusion. It is design. A mirror of Ionia's own dual nature, half monastery and half battlefield, half breathing forest and half unseen void. If you ever feel lost, ask yourself, Are we in the world of bodies or the world of masks? This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a whole city of darkness with many streets and many doors, and we will open them one by one without hurry. You are allowed to drift, to return, to catch only fragments of words while the feeling seeps deeper. Now the night is long, so let us begin. The fire is warm, the wind is quiet for a moment, and it is time to step back into the brothers' childhood before the swords were drawn, and before either of them knew what kind of monster the word honor could become. What makes a monster? Honor, guilt, and the shape of evil. Honor is a beautiful word until you see what people are willing to do in its name. It can polish a sword. It can also guide that sword into a brother's heart. In a world as wide as Runeterra, where spirits listen and the wind itself can cut, we have to ask a quieter, sharper question. What does it mean to be evil when both sides are certain they are right? Tonight, we are not hunting cartoon villains who twirl mustaches in the dark. We are walking into something more unsettling. A story where Yasuo abandons his post to save his master, believing he alone can stand against the Noxian blade, and where Yone pursues him for years, believing that to spare a traitor would be to betray Ionia itself. Two men, two certainties, one grave between them. Evil here is not a single shadow on the wall. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. One street is personal cruelty, the joy of making another soul suffer. Another is blind obedience, the comfort of letting orders think for you. A third is spiritual corruption, when something from the void between worlds whispers that your suffering can be washed away if you only surrender your face. And there is a very quiet street, almost respectable, where the lamps are all made from grudges. The evil of refusing to forgive. Yasuo walks that last road for a long time, drowning in guilt he cannot escape, and yet unable to lay down the burden. Yone, in his turn, chooses duty over the brother who once trained beside him, under Elder Suma's watchful gaze. And that choice leads him to a hillside duel, to a final breath, to waking in a spirit realm where an Azakana's mask presses against his skin. Neither set out to become a monster. Yet look at where their paths lead. To follow them, we will need a simple map. Think of one axis running from intent to consequence, what they meant to do, and what actually happened when steel met flesh. Cross it with duty versus compassion, the rigid code that says you must, and the softer voice that asks, but at what cost? Then add a third tension, personal guilt against the weight of a whole system that praises sacrifice and punishes hesitation. Together, we will wander along those lines, returning to them each time a blade is drawn. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. We are carrying only a small lantern of understanding into the darkness, a fragile light we will hold over each brother's face. Not to judge too quickly, but to see clearly what honor shaped them into, and to ask, as the night grows deeper, which part of that city of evil they truly learned to call home. Ionia's gentle mask, when a peaceful land demands blood. So let us turn that lantern outward, away from the brothers' faces, and hold it up to the land that raised them. In a world as wide as Runeterra, Ionia is the place people point to when they want to believe there is still beauty left, untouched by empire or endless war. Cherry blossoms fall over training yards like slow pink snow. Rivers move with a patient grace, carrying petals, incense ash, and whispered prayers downstream, as if the water itself remembers every hope it has ever ferried to the sea. Monasteries do not simply sit on mountaintops. Some of them float, anchored to cliffs by chains of woven magic and ritual, swaying gently in the mist. Spirits drift through this quiet, like lanterns set loose in the air, half-seen shapes that listen more than they speak. From a distance, this looks like paradise. The children of Ionia spar beneath flowering trees, meditate beside koi ponds, and bow to elders who speak softly of harmony, balance, and listening to the wind. Yet every bow is measured, every step is watched. The calm is not the absence of danger, but the result of 1,000 invisible rules, because beneath the blossoms, the martial orders keep their own kind of ledger. Oaths sworn, duties assigned, lives promised in advance to causes that may never explain themselves. A student does not simply learn a sword form. They are told again and again that their breath, their blood, their very name are forfeit if honor demands it. You are taught that to live without that code is to become a monster, and to die for it is the only clean ending. Now the night is long, so let us begin to see the cruelty hiding inside that beauty. When war comes, when Noxian steel and chemfire tear into Ionian soil, the old songs of harmony do not always bend. They harden. Instead of adapting to chaos, people cling to rigid patterns. You must hold your post. You must obey your masters. You must not question the path chosen for you. Even the spirits, so gentle in peacetime, become silent witnesses to very human suffering. Elder Suma's school, where Yasuo and Yone train, is a perfect miniature of this world. Stone courtyards swept until they gleam. Wind chimes singing over polished practice dummies. A legendary master whose wind techniques are as graceful as falling leaves. And in the center of it all, two brothers. One dutiful, one restless, both wrapped in the same quiet, unspoken pressure. Yasuo is prized and resented for learning what no other disciple can. Yone is praised for discipline, for never stepping outside the lines. Together, we will wander those halls and see that no one needs to shout for the lesson to be heard. The lesson is simple. There is only one correct choice. Stay at your post. Trust the code. Believe that honor will sort the living from the dead. But what happens when the wind itself tells you to move, and the code orders you to stand still? Before any sword is drawn, an older blade is already hanging over them. The idea that doubt is disgrace, that mercy is weakness, that intent does not matter if the rule is broken. It is a whole city of darkness with many streets and many doors, and the brothers are already walking inside it. The real killer in this story may not be the cut that spills blood, but the thought that makes that cut feel necessary. And soon, when Noxus comes and Elder Suma falls, we will watch what that thought forces Yasuo to do, and what it forces Yone to become. Children of steel and wind, Yasuo and Yone's early years, we have watched the blade fall and the master die in our minds. But before that cut, there were smaller, quieter edges, shaping two boys under the same Ionian sky. If you wish to understand the corpse between them, you must first see the childhood that made the hands which held the sword. In a world as wide as Runeterra, war is only one kind of horror. Another lives in training yards at dawn. There, Yone stands in the frost, wooden sword raised, practicing the same form until his fingers blister, then split, then bleed. He does not stop. He resets his stance, breathes, and moves again, as if pain is merely a teacher with a sterner voice. Beside him, or rather somewhere near him, Yasuo is supposed to be doing the same. Instead, he watches the wind. A single leaf escapes a branch. Yasuo chases it, laughing once under his breath, trying to match its fall with the cut of his practice blade. A step too quick, a turn too late. But the intent is there, not to obey the drill, but to understand the invisible current that carries everything. It is a small thing, a boy and a leaf, yet already you can feel how far he is from the rigid line of students, from the ordered world Yone is trying so hard to inhabit. Yone notices, of course. He always does. When the instructor's shadow lengthens toward Yasuo, when a scolding is about to descend like a hammer, Yone shifts. A subtle cough, a quiet apology, a claim that he distracted his younger brother. He corrects Yasuo's stance later, hands firm on elbows and wrists, murmuring the lessons their teachers carved into them. Yone absorbs the expectations so Yasuo does not have to, as if he can stand between his brother and the entire weight of Ionia. Look closely here, because this is where love begins to twist. Yasuo is naturally gifted. Elder Suma sees it first. Wind answers him in a way it does not answer the others. While Yone grinds his fingers to the bone to perfect each form, Yasuo stumbles, flares, rages against structure, then suddenly flows through a technique with a grace that makes the courtyard hold its breath. Some students admire him. Others feel that quieter, more poisonous emotion, jealousy. They whisper that he is careless, that he does not deserve Suma's attention. Yasuo feels their eyes, even if he pretends not to. His temper sparks. A harsh word here, a reckless challenge there. The kind of small human cruelties that seem harmless until you remember how often such moments are the first stones in an avalanche. Yet in the evenings, the world grows softer. The brothers share bowls of rice and simple soup, shoulders touching, trading pieces of fish when Yasuo complains that Yone always chooses the bland ones. At night, they whisper under thin walls. Speaking of fears they would never confess in daylight. Yone dreams of failing everyone. Yasuo dreams of being caged by rules. Together, we will wander through those whispers, because they are the last time their truths can coexist without blood. Yone believes duty is everything. Without it, he thinks, the world falls into shadow and monsters walk free. Yasuo believes that if he betrays his own heart, he becomes a different kind of monster, hollowed by obedience. It is a quiet, invisible fracture. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the slow splitting of a single path into two. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, because soon Noxus will arrive, Elder Suma will fall, and the leaf Yasuo chases on the wind will carry him away from his post, and directly into Yone's sword. The wind's chosen, Yasuo and the burden of talent, and directly into Yone's sword. If Yone is the straight road of duty, then Elder Suma is the old stone that road bends around, and Yasuo is the leaf that refuses to lie still upon it. Suma's art is not simply swordplay. It is a kind of quiet miracle, the taming of something formless. He turns air into armor, He shapes the invisible into a cutting edge. In the training yards, it looks simple. A step, a breath, a sweep of the blade, and suddenly fallen leaves hang motionless in a ring around him, each one pinned by a current you cannot see. Then, with the smallest shift of intent, those same leaves scythe forward and bury themselves in the wooden posts. A shield, a storm. The same gesture, divided only by the heart that guides it. In a world as wide as Runeterra, this is as close as mortals come to commanding the void between all things. Most students watch and feel only awe. A few feel something sharper. Because Suma's technique is sacred precisely because almost no one can touch it. Dozens try. They learn the stances, the breathing, the patterns traced in sand at dawn. Their blades hum, but the wind remains stubborn, indifferent, like a god that does not know their names. Only one boy calls, and the wind answers. Yasuo copies a form once, perhaps twice, and the air stirs. His cuts leave faint white scars of pressure along the courtyard stones. A gust wraps around his body when he moves. Clumsy at first, then eager, then almost affectionate. Suma's eyes soften. The other disciples' eyes harden. Together, we will wander through many kinds of evil in these stories. But envy is one of the oldest, and it wears very ordinary faces. They say he is favored. They say the master whispers to him, keeps him late, teaches him things the others are not ready to see. They are not entirely wrong. Yet the horror for Yasuo is quieter. Every success becomes a weight. Every effortless cut is another promise he did not mean to make. How do you live under a standard you never chose, knowing that if you stumble, the whole temple will say you have betrayed a gift? Beside him, Yone walks a different path. His skill is earned, not given. Hours of repetition, calloused hands, no sudden storms, only steady rain. When the instructors speak of Yone, they praise his discipline, his reliability, the way he fills every form with careful intent. When they speak of Yasuo, they speak of potential, of danger, of what he might become if the wind ever truly loves him. That difference is small, but it is a fracture. Brothers still share rice, laughter, and the same narrow bed on cold nights. Yet something has shifted. One is the example, the other is the exception. Which would you rather be, in a place where standing out can be as frightening as falling short? Now the night is long, so let us begin to watch how talent becomes a kind of shadow. Disciples avoid sparring with Yasuo. If they lose, it was inevitable. If they win, they whisper that he must be slipping. When he walks past, conversations still, then resume in a lower register. The wind itself seems to announce him, tugging at sleeves and lantern flames. He does not mean to be arrogant. He means to be normal, and finds he cannot be. The more the elders rely on him, the more his peers resent him. The more Suma trusts him, the more Yasuo fears he will fail in some unseen, unforgivable way. It is a quiet kind of suffering, to be both admired and alone. One evening, long before Noxian steel bites into Ionian soil, Yasuo stands in the courtyard after dusk. Lanterns burn low. The other students have gone. He draws his blade and breathes. The wind rises, curling around the steel, forming that thin, shimmering veil of pressure that can turn arrows, that can cut a man before he ever feels the pain. It is beautiful, and it is terrible. He stands there, framed by the first stars of the night, wrapped in an invisible storm that only he can command. And he feels, for a heartbeat, at peace. He does not yet know that this same signature, this sacred pattern of air and edge, will one day be read, not as devotion, but as evidence, not as a shield, but as the mark of a murderer over Elder Suma's broken body. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, because the wind has chosen its champion, and the world is already preparing to call him monster. Honor in the blood. Yone's devotion to the code. Yasuo has the wind. Yone has the weight. Where one brother moves like a gust that refuses to be caught, the other is a pillar sunk deep into Ionian soil, built from lessons repeated until they carve grooves in the mind. Now the night is long, so let us begin to walk the quieter road, the one inside Yone's chest. He is proud, though he rarely names it as pride. A straight back at dawn drills, knuckles split on wooden posts, the sting of the instructor's cane accepted without a word. Each rule he follows is a stone in the wall between his family and the chaos outside. Noxian steel, foreign sorcery, the slow rot of people choosing themselves over the village. Discipline is not a burden to him. It is a shelter. It is the only way, he believes, that a small corner of the world can remain untouched by the wider darkness. But that shelter is built over fear. Not fear of pain, or even of death, but of failing the ones who raised him and the code that shaped them. When he lies awake at night, listening to the wind whisper along the eaves, he counts his failures the way a monk might count beads. A missed stance, a late bow, a moment of irritation toward a teacher. Each is catalogued, weighed, and quietly punished. Extra drills, fasting, silence. In a world as wide as Runeterra, he cannot control the armies on the horizon, but he can control the angle of his blade. And always, there is Yasuo. Yone watches him like one studies a flame, with warmth and with worry. He sees the brilliance, the way Yasuo learns Elder Suma's legendary wind technique, as if he were simply remembering something the world had whispered to him long ago. He also sees the danger, that same wind swirling toward rebellion, toward impulsive choices that do not ask permission. How do you protect a brother whose gift is to slip every grasp, even the gentle ones? So Yone chooses the code, again and again, even when it hurts. He accepts harsher training than the others, volunteering for the most grueling exercises, because if the standard is higher for him, perhaps it will be higher for all. When a sparring match goes poorly, he bows, then stays behind after the courtyard empties, repeating the same strike until his arms tremble and the night blurs at the edges. Once, when a visiting soldier mocks Ionian tradition as weak, Yone steps forward, voice steady, and defends the old ways with a formality that feels almost like a blade. He will not let their customs be laughed into dust. For Yone, honor is never just personal. It is communal, almost sacred. If one disciple breaks the code, then every oath feels thinner. If one guardian abandons his post, then every wall seems made of paper. It is a whole city of darkness with many streets and many doors. Selfishness here, cowardice there, small betrayals accumulating like mold. Let one crack spread, and the entire structure rots. This is the horror that stalks Yone's thoughts. more than any physical monster. Together, we will wonder a strange truth. Even in life, Yone is already a hunter. He hunts small shadows of dishonor, the half-truth, the lazy bow, the excuse offered too quickly. He cuts them down in himself first, then in others, believing that if he is merciless with these ghosts, he will never face the larger void they herald. It is a noble intent and a quiet kind of evil, because the same blade that guards can also accuse. Pattern interrupt. Imagine him pausing just once and letting a rule bend for Yasuo. Would the coming tragedy shatter or merely shift its shape? He does not bend. He cannot. And so the chains tighten, link by link, preparing him for a future where the shadows he hunts will no longer be metaphor, and the masks of demons will fit all too well upon his face. When war came to the garden, Noxus invades Ionia. Yet, for all his iron discipline, Yone is still training for shadows that feel safely distant. The world is about to correct that illusion. In a world as wide as Runeterra, peace is never more than a brief pause between storms, and Ionia's gardens have been pausing for a very long time. The brothers rise before dawn, trade blows beneath cherry boughs, argue quietly about rules and freedom. And somewhere beyond the misted cliffs, iron is already moving. It begins at the shore, not with prophecy, but with hulls. Black iron ships carve through the morning fog, their prows spiked and cruel, oars beating a slow, relentless rhythm. Where Ionia's own boats skim like leaves, these vessels arrive like coffins, heavy and deliberate, carrying not pilgrims or traders, but ranks of armored soldiers whose intent has been drilled into them until mercy is only a rumor. When their ramps slam down onto pale sand, the sound is not loud, but it is final. Forests that once only knew the quiet drip of rain learn a new language. The crack of axes, the roar of alchemical fire, the shriek of beasts driven from burning undergrowth. Temples that spent centuries debating the nature of the soul are introduced in a single afternoon to siege engines and disciplined lines of spears. This is not the intimate evil of a single monster in a cell. It is the wide, grey horror of an empire that has decided your land is useful. Together, we will wander for a moment through that first stunned season, when Ionia discovers it is not a sanctuary floating above the world, but simply another coastline on a very hungry map. Even secluded schools like Yasuo and Yone's can no longer pretend the war is a distant story. Messengers arrive breathless. Smoke stains the horizon. Disciples who once worried about stances now whisper about conscription. Yasuo feels it like a storm in his bones. He paces at the edge of the training field, eyes fixed on the roads that lead down to the embattled villages, fingers brushing the hilt of the sword that can call the wind itself. Why wait when people are already suffering? Why hold position while Noxian banners advance through fields he once walked as a boy? Yone's answer is quieter, heavier. Orders must be followed. The monastery must stand. Someone must guard what little of the old world can still be protected, even if the rest is swallowed by darkness. To him, breaking rank now would be its own kind of betrayal. Another crack in a dam already straining. At the center of these arguments stands Elder Suma. He is no warlord, no roaring commander, but a revered master, whose teachings bind the school together, and whose wind techniques have become a symbol of Ionia's living spirit. In the new calculus of invasion, his safety is both strategic and sacred. If he falls, a doctrine falls with him. So the question becomes terribly simple. Who leaves to meet the fire, and who stays to guard the flame? Allow the night to grow a little deeper as you imagine the council's decision, the assignment spoken in formal tones that do not quite hide the fear. One brother will be sent outward, one will remain at Suma's side, and in that single quiet division of duty, the path to murder, exile, and rebirth is chosen. They do not yet know which of them has just been condemned. Do you? The choice at the gate. Yasuo abandons his post. They do not yet know which of them has just been condemned. Do you? Let us stand with Yasuo in the quiet that follows that council decree, in the moment where duty hardens into a chain around his throat. The decision has been made. Yone rides out to meet the invaders. Yasuo remains behind, a single sword and a single gate, sworn to guard Elder Suma and the fragile calm of the inner temple. Outside, the world is breaking. You can almost hear it with him, the distant thunder of steel on steel, the low roar of Noxian war machines chewing through sacred groves, the wind itself carrying the copper scent of blood across Ionia's terraces. A world of darkness and fire just beyond the walls, and here, only the soft crackle of lanterns and the measured drip of water in stone basins. It should be peaceful. It is not. Yasuo feels it first as a dissonance, a wrong note in the music of the air. The wind that has always answered him now stumbles, tugging at his cloak, worrying the banners. Speaking of pressure and panic, where there should be serenity. Elder Suma is elsewhere in the compound, meditating, trusting in the code, trusting in the posted guard. And Yasuo, the only disciple to master Suma's legendary wind technique, is told to do nothing but wait. This is the horror for him. Not the Noxians at the gate, but the command to stand still when every instinct, every breath of air, whispers that the danger is already inside. In a world as wide as Runeterra, some monsters carry axes and banners. Others arrive as silence at the wrong moment. Which is worse? The enemy you can see, or the unseen void opening in your absence? He remembers the order. Hold the line. Do not abandon your post. The words are simple, carved into the Ionian idea of honor, as deeply as any temple inscription. Yet his intent twists against them, because he believes, truly, desperately, that only he can shield Suma with the wind, that any other sword would be too slow, too ordinary, too mortal. So he moves, one step away from the gate, then another, then a run. The choice is both heroic and damning, a leap of faith driven by love for his master and fear of losing the one man who believed in him, but also a betrayal of the very rule that made him a guardian at all. The air answers his panic, coiling around his feet, hurling him through storm-tossed courtyards where petals and ash mingle in frantic spirals. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a sprint through gathering shadow, where each stride is a question he cannot take back. Somewhere ahead, he imagines Suma turning in surprise, robes stirring in a sudden gale. Somewhere behind, unseen, a quieter tragedy begins. An empty guard post, a missing sword, a breach in the pattern Ionia trusted. He does not see the first acolyte who notices the vacancy and freezes. He does not hear the murmured, frightened word, deserter, take root like a poisoned seed. He only hears the wind screaming with him as he races toward a fate already sealed. Remember this image. A lonely gate, lanterns swaying, no watcher beneath them. In Ionia, that silence is louder than any battle cry, and the absence of a single blade will soon echo like a scream that never stops. Together, we will wander into what that scream costs him. A master's corpse and a murderer's wind. He reaches the inner sanctum, expecting rebuke, maybe a patient sigh. Not the kind of silence that feels like the world itself has stopped breathing. The lanterns here do not sway. The air does not move. Even the ever-present wind seems to hold itself back, as if afraid of what it has done. You and I will stand with Yasuo in that doorway for a moment longer than is comfortable, because this is the point where the story hardens, where rumor becomes fate. Elder Suma lies where he fell, robes fanned around him like a dark flower, his staff a broken line at his side. There is no blood sprayed across the walls, no shattered stone, only an uncanny stillness, and the faint, stinging taste of cut air on the tongue. You know this sensation already, the memory of a blade through wind, the way space itself seems to flinch. Suma's body bears it too. Not crude gashes, not the brutal ruin of a Noxian axe, but narrow, precise lines, as if the air had been folded and sharpened and then allowed to unfold inside him. It is a concrete image, and from it a terrible, abstract truth unfolds. This is Suma's own wind style, turned inward, the very technique he perfected and passed to only one living disciple, Yasuo. In a world as wide as Rune Terror, evil is not always a cackling monster in the dark. Sometimes it is the quiet arithmetic of circumstance, the way a pattern of facts can strangle intent. Suma is dead by a legendary wind technique. Yasuo is the only known student to have truly mastered it. Yasuo has abandoned his sacred post at the exact hour the master is slain. Each piece is simple. Together, they become a verdict. Yasuo does what any stunned soul does when horror arrives too neatly. He denies it. He kneels, searching the wounds for some flaw in the pattern, some hint of another hand, another style, another story. He tastes the air, feels for unfamiliar currents, begs the wind itself to confess that it belonged to someone else. But the currents are tangled, already fading, and the room is so very, very still. He understands, with the same cold clarity with which he once read Suma's movements, that no one will believe what he says over what they can see. A deserter, the unique technique, the master's corpse. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, yet every path leads back to his name. Now the night is long, so let us begin to notice something cruel. In that moment, the truth starts to lose its power. The story others will tell about him is already forming beyond these walls, carried on frightened whispers and righteous anger. Yasuo feels it closing around him like a scabbard around a blade, defining his shape before he can even speak. Together, we will wander into what happens when a man realizes he has become the traitor his people need, and ask a quiet question. When the world decides you are evil, does it matter what you actually did? Or only how well you play the role they have written for you? Steel against steel, brother against brother, under a sky that no longer cares which way the wind is really blowing. Branded a traitor. When a nation turns its back, Accusations do not begin as proclamations. They begin as breath, as the smallest disturbance in the quiet air of a temple that once felt eternal. In the days after Elder Suma's body is found, the story of his death moves through Ionia with a strange, almost ritual grace. A whisper in the training yard, a murmur in the tea house, a soft, poisonous question in the halls where Yasuo once walked as a favored student. Together, we will wander through those corridors for a moment and listen to how a name can change its weight overnight. Wind killed him, someone says. A master of wind deserted his post, another replies. The facts are simple, so the conclusion is easy. And in a world that has just tasted Noxian steel, simplicity feels like mercy. The formal declarations follow the rumors, as if they were always meant to arrive. Elders convene, seals are pressed into wax, and Yasuo's name is spoken aloud with a new ceremonial contempt, as though the syllables themselves have become a stain. Watch how reverence curdles into outrage. Elder Suma was not merely a teacher. He was a living symbol of Ionia's balance, of restraint in the face of horror. To lose him to an invader would have been tragedy. To lose him, apparently, to an impulsive disciple who abandoned his sacred duty is something worse. It feels like a wound from inside the body, and those are the ones that fester. You can almost see the thought take root. Noxus is an obvious monster, loud and red and marching, but an internal traitor. That is a quieter evil, a shadow that suggests the code itself can fail. So the people cling to the safer belief that the code is perfect and the man is flawed. One villain is easier to hate than a cracked foundation. Yasuo tries to speak. He goes first to those who trained beside him, to the comrades who once laughed at his stubbornness. Their eyes slide away. Where there was warmth, there is procedure. Where there was trust, there is the cold recitation of charges. Did he mean to kill Suma? Did he not? The elders do not care for intent, only for outcome. And even neutral voices prefer the comfort of a single, convenient culprit over the nightmare that perhaps no one truly knows what happened. Then the order comes. A bounty, inked in careful strokes, carried by messengers whose faces never change. Yasuo is to be hunted, not just as a murderer, but as a warning carved into living flesh. This is what becomes of those who break the code, who place their own judgment above the will of Ionia. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, and every door now bears his name. Pattern interrupt, if you like. For all his skill, there is no duel he can win against a verdict already written. So he leaves. The only home he has ever known falls behind him. Roofs and cherry trees dissolving into mist. The gates close with the softness of finality. The wind that once played at his heels now stretches out before him in a long, lonely road. Its song no longer a companion's whistle, but the hollow, distant howl of exile under a night that has decided who the traitor must be. And somewhere behind him, another set of footsteps begins to follow. The hunter of dishonor. Yone takes up the chase. Those footsteps behind Yasuo do not belong to a bounty hunter or a nameless soldier. They belong to the boy who once shared his bedroll, his secrets, and the soft terror of thunder in the night. They belong to Yone. Together, we will wander into the moment when an older brother, raised on discipline and duty, looks at a single act of supposed betrayal and decides that the only way to heal the wound is with a blade. When Elder Suma's body is found, the scene is almost unbearably quiet. No torn earth, no charred stone, only the delicate scars of wind along the walls and the stillness of a master who should have been untouchable. In a world as wide as Runeterra, there are many ways to die, but this death speaks with one voice. A wind technique, a signature only Yasuo has mastered. For Yone, the horror is not in the blood, but in the pattern that points in one direction and refuses to look away. Yone's grief arrives in ordered steps. First, disbelief. The little brother who chased leaves in the courtyard cannot be a murderer. Then the teachings return, like an iron cage closing. The elders speak. The evidence is laid out. A deserter, a dead master, a wind-cut corpse. To doubt Yasuo's guilt would be to doubt the school, the elders, the very code that shaped his life. What happens to a dutiful son when the system he serves accuses the person he loves most? Yone has never been Yasuo. Where Yasuo tested fences, Yone reinforced them. Where Yasuo listened to the wind, Yone listened to rules. His identity is woven from obedience, to family, to teacher, to Ionia itself as it bleeds under Noxian blades. So when the council names Yasuo traitor and commands pursuit, Yone does not argue. He bows. The motion is simple. The intent is devastating. Now the night is long, so let us begin with that bow. On the surface, it is loyalty. Beneath, it is a quiet act of self-erasure. He chooses the role of executioner because the alternative would require him to stand against the entire order, to say that the world, the elders, the law might be wrong. Instead, he tells himself a gentler lie, that by killing Yasuo, he will cleanse the stain, restore balance, and give their mother, their school, their homeland, some fragile measure of peace. Oh, this is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the slower horror of a good man persuading himself that an unforgivable act is necessary. Each step Yone takes after his brother is a prayer and a sentence. He imagines the moment of the duel as a kind of purification, wind and steel washing away disgrace. Yet with every village he passes, every rumor of Yasuo he hears, something in him frays. The code does not account for the way his chest tightens at the thought of Yasuo's face when he finally turns. In the quiet between footsteps, Yone begins to change. Not into a sadist, not into a creature of the void or a demon of senseless evil, but into a different kind of monster altogether. The man who will place honor above love, who will trade a living brother for a spotless story. And somewhere ahead, the wind carries both their names, already tasting of blood. Years on the run, Yasuo the Wanderer. Yasuo walks ahead of that wind-carried promise, long before he ever hears Yone's new voice. He does not know he is being measured against a spotless story. He only knows the road, the ache in his shoulders, and the way the world looks at him now as if evil had quietly put on his face. Let us follow him, just for a while, as he drifts from shrine to crossroads, to nameless inns. A dirt path under grey Ionian skies. A bowl of cheap sake in a forgotten village. The liquid thin and bitter, bought with the last of his coins. Nights where he leans against a crooked gatepost, a sword across his knees, and asks the darkness a question he already fears the answer to. killer, if everyone believes I am. The wind is his only reply. It curls around his fingers when he practices Elder Suma's technique in empty fields. Invisible blades carving clean lines through falling leaves, through rain, through the quiet. Each arc is proof of his mastery, and each is another reminder. Suma died by this same art. In a world as wide as Runeterra, a single style can be both blessing and accusation, both sacred legacy and perfect evidence. Rumors move faster than feet. A drunk in a roadside teahouse mutters about a swordsman who drinks alone and never pays in full. A caravan guard swears he saw a traitor who abandoned his post the night Noxus marched. A coward who ran while his master bled. A child, wide-eyed, repeats a story of a man who kills with the air itself. No blade needed, just a gesture, and then silence. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. Every tavern, every campfire, adds another crooked alley to the legend called Yasuo. He could shout his innocence. He could stand in a crowded square and tell them that leaving his post was meant to save Suma, not doom him. Instead, he walks on, because intent does not resurrect the dead, and somewhere beneath his stubbornness lies a quiet, festering thought. If he had stayed, Suma might yet live. This is the horror of his exile, that he is both wrongly accused and not entirely blameless. So he drifts, trying not to care, and fails. A bandit reaches for a merchant's daughter on a moonless road. The wind snaps, and the man falls without seeing steel. A Noxian straggler threatens farmers. The sake-soaked wanderer at the doorway suddenly moves with terrible precision, leaving only bodies and swirling dust. Yasuo accepts no payment, offers no name, and is gone before gratitude can harden into expectation. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a man trying to outrun both the monster in the stories and the one in his own reflection. Together, we will wander a little farther with him, into the places where tracks blur and motives tangle. Because on these same lonely roads, another set of footsteps is closing in, guided now by something colder than grief. Yone is following the trail the rumors have laid, step by patient step, and the wind that once only answered Yasuo's doubts is beginning to carry a second question. When the brothers finally meet, which story will the knight choose to keep? You will see that answer drawn in steel. A blade in the fog, Yone's relentless pursuit. Yone's answer is not written in the wind, but in footsteps, in questions, in a blade that never quite leaves its sheath. Together, we will wander a different kind of hunt now, not the wandering of a drunk swordsman through border towns, but the cold, straight line of a man who has decided that his own suffering is a fair price for certainty. Where Yasuo drifts, Yone measures. He arrives at a village, not with a shout, but with a bow, with the formal calm of an Ionian disciple who still remembers which hand serves tea and which hand kills. He asks after a traitor, after a wind-scarred corpse, after a brother. Each rumor he confirms is like a small, precise stroke of a whetstone along his resolve. A ritual, sharpening done in the quiet hours when others sleep, and he refuses to. You can almost see his world narrowing. Once, there were lessons, students, the distant thunder of Noxian war machines, the question of what Ionia should become in a world as wide as Runeterra. Now there is only the trail. Friends become correspondents. Home becomes an inn room, with the door wedged shut. Even the war fades to a kind of background thunder. Important, yes, but irrelevant to the single point his life has collapsed around: finding Yasuo and deciding what justice truly demands. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is something slower, more corrosive. Sleepless nights spent replaying every childhood argument, every moment he defended Yasuo, every time he wondered if mercy was simply cowardice in softer clothing. The joy leaches out first, then the color, until Yone is less a man with a mission and more a mission wearing a man's face. He becomes a shadow at the edge of campfires. Soldiers, trading stories of the honor-mad hunter, lower their voices when they feel him pass, though they cannot say why. In taverns that shelter deserters and thieves, his name is spoken the way one speaks of a monster in the dark. Yone, the brother who will not stop. The horror is not his body count. It is his intent, the unwavering line he draws between traitor and victim, even when that line cuts through his own heart. Then, a pattern interrupt in the quiet. A rumor that sounds too precise. A wind technique described exactly. A duel recounted by a trembling witness who swears the accused laughed like a man trying not to cry. You feel the orbit tightening. Two blades drawn by the same magnetic pull of unfinished business and unspoken truth, circling closer with every step. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and you will see how that circle finally closes, and how one brother's hunt for a traitor becomes the other's first true lesson in what honor costs when the story chooses only one of them to survive. Kin of the stained blade, the night of the duel begins. The circle you felt tightening finally narrows to a single courtyard, a single breath, a single line of rain-slick stone waiting to be crossed. Come sit beside the fire, summoner, and look with me, not at armies or empires now, but at two brothers walking toward the smallest, cruelest battlefield of all. The shot opens low. Wet cobbles glisten like scaled armor under a thin veil of rain. Lanterns sway in the wind, their light trembling across puddles, turning each ripple into a brief, shivering halo. You hear it before you see them, the soft percussion of raindrops on wood to the hollow drip from eaves, the almost delicate clink as a sword's bindings are loosened, metal brushing against metal with ritual care. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow, deliberate approach, the kind you feel in your ribs. Yasuo stands alone beneath a crooked gate, straw hat bowed, cloak darkened by the weather until he seems half-shadow himself. His hand rests near the hilt at his side, not eager, not trembling, simply there, as if it has always known this exact place, this exact moment, was waiting for it. He is tired. Not the tired of a long road or a sleepless night, but the deeper exhaustion of a man who has run from one story only to discover it was always circling back. In a world as wide as Runeterra, with its void things and tyrants and demons of suffering, it is almost absurd that the blade he fears most belongs to his own blood. Yet some horrors are intimate, written not in grand evil, but in the quiet certainty that you deserve what is coming. Yasuo exhales, mist curling in the lantern light. In his mind, Elder Suma's fall is a constant replay. The abandoned post, the wind technique only he could wield, the accusation that turned every ally into a hunter. Somewhere in that loop, His brother's face has always been waiting at the end, stern, unbending, inevitable. Was this not how his path was always meant to close? On the edge of Yone's judgment, then the camera shifts. A figure steps from the rain fog at the far end of the courtyard, silhouette framed by a distant lantern. Broad shoulders, straight spine, the same stance Yasuo remembers from training yards and festival nights, when wooden swords clacked instead of steel. But the edges are harder now, the lines cut deeper by years of pursuit, by nights spent tracking a traitor who wore his family's name. Yone arrives like a ghost that refused to stay buried. His eyes, when they catch the lantern glow, do not blaze with theatrical rage. They carry something colder and worse. Years of judgment, a ledger of unspoken grief. Every shared meal, every lesson, every time he shielded a younger brother from a master's reprimand, all weighed and measured against a single, unforgivable absence. Between them, silence, no war cry, no insult, only the rain and the low creak of wood. It is a silence crowded with childhood, the steam of rice bowls between them, the sting of practice blows, the rare small smiles that passed like comets and were never named. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, each one a memory neither dares to open. Together, we will wander that silence for a moment longer. You can feel the horror here is not in death, but in intent. The knowledge that both believe they are right, that honor itself has become the monster standing between them. A droplet slides from Yasuo's hat and shatters on the stone. Yone's fingers shift, almost imperceptibly, toward his hilt. The quiet clink of steel rings out again, sharper now. And just as one brother's hand closes on his sword, the scene holds, breath suspended, the first note of a song unsung, waiting for the next stroke to fall. Steel, wind, and regret. Inside the brothers' final duel, the note falls. Steel whispers from twin scabbards, and time itself seems to draw a slow, shuddering breath. Allow the night to grow a little deeper as we step into that frozen heartbeat between brothers, where every motion is a memory, and every cut is carved from years of unspoken words. Yone moves first. A straight line, a clean draw, the blade an extension of duty drilled into bone. Yasuo answers not with a charge, but with a sway, a sidestep that feels almost lazy, wind curling at his ankles like an old friend. Disciplined precision meets fluid, wind-borne improvisation. And in the quiet clash of steel, you can hear two different worlds of training colliding. A thrust from Yone, direct, economical, aimed at the throat. Yasuo is already turning, not because he sees the blade, but because he remembers a boy who always favored the fastest path. He pivots past, sheathing and drawing in the same breath, his sword a single silver arc. A gust follows the strike, scattering rain. And for a moment you might ask yourself, is this a duel or the final examination of a shared childhood? Together, we will wander through their movements as if through old stories. Yone faints low. Yasuo flinches high. An echo of a spar long ago when a wooden sword caught his jaw. Yone sees it, of course. He has always seen Yasuo's tells. The little hesitations that no master ever quite beat out of him. Each parry is a correction he once tried to give. Each riposte is a reprimand delivered in steel instead of scolding. Inside Their thoughts are louder than the storm. Yone's intent is a narrow blade. This kill will restore what was broken. Elder Suma's blood, the Academy's shame, Ionia's wounded honor. All of it, he believes, can be balanced if Yasuo falls here. The horror is not in hatred, but in the certainty that this is necessary. That suffering is the toll demanded by an abstract code. Yasuo's mind is a different kind of darkness. Part of him fights to live. The old instinct never died, but beneath each gust, beneath each playful sway, there is a quiet wish. If Yone is the one to end him, perhaps the wandering stops. Perhaps the void of guilt finally closes. Is it truly evil to hope for your own death, if it might heal the one you wronged? Blades accelerate, then slow again, as if the world cannot decide whether to rush or linger over its tragedy. Yone anticipates a spinning slash and steps into it, ready to end this with one perfect stroke. But Yasuo, at the last instant, breaks his own habit. The wind does not spiral, it snaps. His sword dips, then rises in a sudden, ruthless line. Steel finds flesh. The air itself seems to recoil as a spray of blood rides the wind, red scattering across grey stone. In Yone's eyes there is first shock, then a dawning, terrible understanding. The weight of all the years he spent hunting a brother, instead of a truth. He falls without drama, as if bowing. Rain catches the blood, thins it, draws it down into the earth until the stain is swallowed by the world. Yasuo stands alone in the storm, sword lowered, victory settling on his shoulders like a shroud. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the quiet horror of a man who has won the one fight he most needed to lose. And as the night closes around him, you can feel another story waiting, just beyond the veil of rain, where death is not the end, and even a broken oath may yet be called to face the shadows again. A brother's last breath, what Yone learned. Too late. Yasuo stands, sword lowered, and for a heartbeat the rain is the loudest thing in the world. Then you remember there is another silence here, heavier than the storm, as Yone's body meets the earth, and the cold of the ground begins to seep into him like a final, unwelcome guest. Listen to how quickly a warrior's senses, once honed to every whisper of steel and wind, fall away. Sound goes first, the clash of their blades, the distant rumble of thunder, the shouts of villagers that once framed their childhood duels in the courtyard. All of it pulls back, as if someone is closing doors, one by one, in a long, echoing hall. Yasuo's voice is still there, but to Yone, it comes from very far away, thin and wavering, like a memory trying not to be forgotten. The coals climbs. Stone presses against his back, wet and unyielding, and the warmth of his own blood is a shrinking island in a spreading sea of frost. In a world as wide as Runeterra, a man can cross battlefields, chase a traitor across half a continent, and yet his last journey is only a few inches. From breath to stillness, from certainty to doubt, because in those fading moments, Yasuo speaks, not as the monster Yone has hunted, but as the frightened brother who once refused to bow, who once abandoned his post to run to Elder Suma's side. He stammers through the story, the Noxian blades in the night, the wind technique that was his alone, the way guilt and accusation closed around him like a noose. You can hear the desperation in it, even through the muffling fog of Yone's ebbing awareness. Yasuo is not just defending himself, he is confessing his own terror, that he might truly be the killer everyone believes him to be. And here is the quiet horror. Yone hears enough. Not every word, not every detail, but fragments that do not fit the simple tale he has carried like a sword in his heart. Elder Soma's death by wind, yes, but also hints of another presence, of Noxian intent, of an attack that began before Yasuo ever broke his post. The story he believed is no longer whole. A crack appears. If this conversation had happened an hour earlier, would there have been a duel at all? If Yone had heard the tremor in Yasuo's voice, seen the way his brother's certainty had long since shattered, would honor have loosened its grip? These are the questions that arrive exactly when they can no longer save him. Yasuo leans close now, words tumbling, trying to force years of doubt, exile, and suffering into the narrowing space of a dying man's attention. He wants to explain. He wants to be condemned and forgiven in the same breath. But Yone's tongue is heavy, his lungs shallow, and each attempt at speech dissolves into a ragged gasp. Intent and understanding pass each other like shadows on opposite sides of a wall. Then, at last, there is only breathing. Then not even that. Yone's death is an ending. A brother's last breath spent staring at a sky he can no longer see. A life of rigid duty collapsing into unanswered questions. Yet it is also an opening. For in Ionia, the veil is thin, and when his eyes close on this world, others open onto a place where the spirit realm waits with its own predators, its own demons of doubt and hunger. Now the night is long, so let us begin to follow him. Together, we will wander past the moment of death, into that other darkness where an Azakana is already watching, and where Yone's unfinished story is about to be rewritten by something that does not breathe, but still knows how to hunt. Between worlds. Yone's first death. For Yone does not arrive as a single blow. It is a loosening. A slow untying of everything that ever held him to the world. One heartbeat. He is on the grass with Yasuo's blade inside him, lungs filling with the copper taste of failure. The next, weight begins to fall away. Sound peels back. The clash of steel, the ragged breath of his brother, even the distant cries of a world at war with Noxus, all recede as if someone is quietly closing a door between rooms. What remains is a grey, breathless hush, and the sensation of slipping out of his own body, like a shadow, leaving its owner at dusk. Memories drift up first, not in order, not as a tidy story, but like leaves in slow water. A training yard, his mother's stern eyes, Yasuo laughing when he should have been bowing, Elder Suma's calm voice speaking of duty. Each image turns once in the dim light, then floats past him into a vast, colourless in-between. You can almost see them, cannot you? Circling a man who can no longer reach them, yet cannot quite let them go. Around Yone, the spirit realm unfolds as Ionia's shadow reflection. The same mountains rise, but their edges are softened, carved from mist and memory instead of stone. Forests stand where his childhood paths once lay, yet every tree is pale, every leaf muted to ash green, as if all colour has been drained out by centuries of quiet suffering. Villages hover like half-remembered dreams, their houses transparent, their lanterns burning with smokeless, blue-grey flame. It is the world he knew and yet wrong, like a familiar song played in a minor key. Here, The wind does not carry birdsong or market calls. It carries whispers, fragments of unresolved emotions, torn from the living and the dead alike. Regret sighs along abandoned bridges. Anger coils under empty rivers. Love, unspoken and unanswered, trembles in the eaves of houses that no longer stand. In a world as wide as rune terror, even the spirit realm must find room for what people refuse to release. Yone walks, or thinks he does. Each step leaves no mark. His body lies cooling somewhere behind him, yet his mind clings stubbornly to duty. He tells himself this is a test, that the code he lived by will still matter here, that if he holds to honor tightly enough, he will be judged, measured, perhaps even forgiven for failing to bring Yasuo to justice. Is that not the cruelest hope? That the rules you died for will still protect you after death? But something else is listening, not to his virtues, but to the fractures running through them, to the guilt that he did not see the truth about Elder Suma's murder, to the anger that Yasuo's wind cut deeper than any Noxian blade, to the rigid, unbending refusal to forgive that has followed him like a second sword. These are not medals in this place. They are wounds, glowing like embers in the grey. Together, we will wander a little closer, allow the night to grow a little deeper, because in this liminal hush, an appetite has awakened. It is small compared to the grand demons of legend. No towering lord of terror, no emperor of endless torment. An Azakana is a lesser thing, a parasite of feeling, a monster that feeds not on blood, but on one specific festering emotion: fear of abandonment, obsession with control, the quiet certainty that you were wronged and must never relent. To such a creature, Yone is a beacon. His grief, his rage, his sharpened sense of betrayal burn in the grey like a solitary flame in endless fog, and like a moth that has waited its whole existence for that single light, something begins to move toward him through the spirit shadow of Ionia, drawn by the promise of a soul it can gnaw into something new. He does not see it yet, but he will. The first sign will not be teeth or claws. It will be a voice, made from his own doubts, answering him when he thinks he is alone. The mask that hungers. Yone meets the Azakana. The answer comes like an echo that never learned it was supposed to be silent. It speaks his name, not as Yone hears it from Yasuo's lips, but as a judgment, as a sentence already carried out. What follows is not merely a meeting with a monster, but with the shape of a man's own mistakes, stitched into something that can bite. The spirit shadow of Ionia parts, and the Azakana shows itself. It is not claws first, not fangs, but a mask, pale and long and hungry, carved in the likeness of every stern elder who ever measured Yone and found him wanting. Around it, a body half formed from dark reeds and torn banners. Blades of bone hanging like discarded training swords, each one etched with a single word: duty, loyalty, honor, betrayal. It wears his obsessions as armor, each shard of rigid principle hammered into a jagged plate. In a world as wide as rune terror, demons come in many magnitudes of evil. The great ones drown kingdoms. The subtle ones, these Azakana, deal in smaller tides. A single heart, a single flavor of suffering. This one has learned the taste of Yone already. It feeds on the iron taste of his honor, on the sourness of self-loathing, on the bitter, lingering note of a brother's supposed betrayal. To it, Yone is not prey. He is a banquet, arranged in careful courses. Your code, it whispers, voice leaking from the mask like smoke from a cracked sensor, brought you to the wrong throat. The spirit realm around them shifts, and Yone sees the courtyard again. Yasuo's blade at his, the final cut that ended him. But the scene tilts, just slightly, like a compass needle, nudged off true north. Elder Suma's body lies between them, the wound in his chest opening and closing, like a mouth that almost speaks Yasuo's innocence. You hunted the traitor, the Azakana croons, but you never hunted the truth. Tell me, swordsman, was your honor ever pointed in the right direction? Every taunt is a hook sunk into old doubts. Every vision is a mirror, forcing him to look at the horror that his intent, so pure in his own eyes, still led to fratricide. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. Their clash is slow, deliberate, like two thoughts arguing inside one skull. When Yone strikes, his blade cuts not only through spectral flesh, but through the memory of his own certainty. When the Azakana rakes him, its claws open wounds shaped like questions. What if you were wrong? What if you were always wrong? Together, we will wander this duel as both dance and dissection. Steel meets spirit, and the spirit looks back. At last, bleeding doubt into the air like ink into water, Yone drives his sword through the mask. The Azakana shrieks, body collapsing into a thin, receding void, its borrowed armor of fears falling away. The mask does not. It shatters, then reforms, shards spinning like autumn leaves in a storm, and hurls itself onto his face. It burns, it binds, it fuses. In that quiet, strangled moment, Yone understands. He has slain the monster, but not escaped it. Its hunger is now his burden, its sight now his second sight. The hunter of demons has just been born, and the first thing he will have to hunt is the part of himself that agreed to wear that mask. But what happens when he meets the man who first taught him how to hold a blade? Reborn with a demon's face, the new Yone. He wakes with a stolen breath. Air tears into dead lungs, cold and heavy, and Yone's first sound in the mortal world is not a word, but a ragged gasp that feels like it belongs to someone else. There is weight on his face. Not the familiar press of a training mask or helm, but something colder, older, clinging to his skin like a second skull. He reaches up, fingers brushing carved lines and jagged edges, and understands, in a quiet, dreadful way, that he has not come back as a man. Together, we will wander through this moment of rebirth, where the boundary between spirit and flesh, between hunter and monster, blurs like mist over Ionia's ruined fields. The Azakana's mask is not just an ornament, it is an organ of perception. Through the slits where eyes should be, Yone does not simply see the world, he tastes it. A merchant passes, all polite smiles and careful bows, and beneath that surface, he feels a slick, clinging greed, the fear of losing status, the obsession with coin that might one day ripen into something with claws. A grieving widow prays at a roadside shrine, and her sorrow brushes against him like cold rain, heavy but harmless. He moves through villages and forests, as if through overlapping tides of hidden intent. Every human heart a shore where some small darkness is trying to land. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. The horror is slow, patient, and intimate. An Azakana is not born from war alone, but from the quiet suffering of one mind that cannot let go of its hunger, its envy, its self-hatred. Yone's new sight lets him feel those fractures before they widen, like a swordsman sensing the flaw in an opponent's stance long before the blade falls. In a world as wide as Runeterra, many call such a hunter a hero. A man who stalks invisible demons, who cuts down the shadows that feed on villagers' nightmares. Sounds noble enough, but Yone does not walk for glory, and he does not walk for simple goodness. He hunts Azakana because he failed to hunt the right monsters when he was alive. He chased Yasuo across Ionia, certain that the traitor outside the gate was the only evil that mattered, and never saw the corruption of fear, pride, and rigid honor blooming in his own chest. Now the night is long, so let us begin with the irony. In death, he has become exactly what he always thought he was, a warden of honor, a blade against inner corruption. Before, the monsters were metaphors, cowards, oath-breakers, men who turned away from duty. Now, when his sword cleaves through an Azakana, it splits open a very literal beast of obsession and dread. Yet every exorcism is also a mirror. Each time he corners a demon swollen on someone's secret terror, he must ask himself a question that has no easy answer. Is he truly the cure, or merely a more disciplined kind of monster? When the mask tightens, when the Azakana within him whispers its hunger for more fear, more prey, he feels how thin the line is between judge and condemned. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. With every demon he cuts down, Yone walks another alley in that city, listening for the echo of his own footsteps in the things he destroys. And somewhere ahead, at the end of one of those streets, waits a familiar silhouette with a wind-scarred blade and a guilt that tastes, to Yone's new senses, like a storm about to break. The weight of two sins, abandonment and unforgiveness. We have followed Yasuo and Yone through storms and steel. But for a moment, let the blades fall silent and allow the night to grow a little deeper. Two brothers stand at the heart of this story. Yet the true horror is not in the cut of the sword, but in the choices that place those swords in each other's hands. Everyone tells you Yasuo's sin is murder. He killed his master. He killed his brother. The world of Ionia brands him traitor, kinslayer, monster. But if you look more closely, if you listen past the accusations, another shape emerges in the shadow. His central sin is abandonment, the single step away from his post, taken in desperate love, that unmoored everything that followed. He was the only disciple to master Elder Suma's wind technique, the lone shield meant to stand between a frail old man and the Noxian invasion. When the war came, Yasuo believed, with the fierce certainty of youth, that he alone could save his teacher by going to him. Intent, protection, outcome, an empty post, a dead elder, and a trail of bodies as he fled the sentence he thought he deserved. He never forgives himself for that first step. Every tavern, every lonely road is haunted by the echo of boots walking away when they were sworn to stay. Yone's sin is more austere, but no less deadly. In a world as wide as Runeterra, evil does not always laugh. Sometimes it recites the code. Yone chooses unforgiveness. He chooses the law of the school, the official story written in blood and wind. over the brother he once shielded from bullies and scolded for skipping drills. He does not question how convenient the evidence is. He lets duty justify a hunt that ends with his own corpse cooling in the rain. Intent, honor, outcome, fratricide. Yone's blade is clean. His conscience, he thinks, aligned with tradition. Yet he never asks whether the code itself might be flawed. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the quiet horror of realizing that both brothers fell from places that felt virtuous at the time. Love, honor, responsibility, twisted just enough that good intentions became a corridor into darkness. Remember our axes: intent versus outcome, duty versus compassion. Yasuo follows the heart, even when it breaks rules. Yone clings to rules, even when they break hearts. They walk different streets in the same city of darkness, each convinced they are doing what must be done, each blind to the shadow cast by their own stance. Let me ask you a question you do not need to answer aloud. When you look at your own life, your own small tragedies and loyalties, are you more like Yasuo, ready to leap the fence for someone you love? Consequences be damned. Or more like Yone, holding the line so tightly that you would rather lose a person than bend a principle. Together, we will wander closer to the moment when those two paths cross again, and see what remains when abandonment finally meets unforgiveness face to face. Echoes in voice lines, how the brothers remember differently. And when abandonment finally meets unforgiveness, the echoes do not stop at the graveside. They linger in steel, in wind, in the quiet things the brothers say when they think no one is listening. Listen not to the clash of blades, but to the smaller sounds that follow. Yasuo's voice, in the game you know so well, is a wandering storm wrapped in a man. Death is like the wind, always by my side. A clever line, perhaps, until you hear the intent beneath it. He is not only talking about enemies, he is talking about Suma, about Yone, about every life his sword has taken, trailing him like a cold, invisible cloak. Just looking for a road home, he murmurs. And the horror is that he no longer believes he deserves to find it. He jokes, sometimes, but the humor is a cracked mask. No cure for fools, he says, as if he is describing the world. In truth, he is describing himself. A deserter, a supposed murderer, a man who chose love for his master over duty to his post, and watched the world call that choice evil. In a world as wide as Runeterra, there are many monsters. Yasuo fears that he is one of them, not because he enjoyed the suffering he caused, but because he cannot undo it. Yone's voice is a different blade, colder, straighter. Your soul is weighed and found wanting. Where Yasuo circles his guilt like a wounded animal, Yone dissects. He speaks of balance, of judgment, of necessary deaths. I am the mask of vengeance, he says, yet there is no boast in it, only resignation. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. His horror is procedural, ritual, a warden's ledger written in blood and spirit light. When they remember their duel, you can hear the split in the story. For Yasuo, every line is an apology he cannot quite say. I will not forget who I am, which really means I will not forgive what I have done. The drawn sword was a tragic mistake, a last, desperate defense against a brother who would not listen. For Yone, that same moment was a righteous duty. A traitor stood before him, branded by wind and rumor, and honor demanded an end. When he says, "We all wear masks," you can feel the old certainty cracking. the Azakana's whisper twined with his own. What if your justice was built on a lie? Together, we will wander between these two voices and see that the truth lives in the narrow space where neither brother is entirely right nor entirely wrong. And the night is not yet finished deciding which of them it will claim. Ionia's broken mirror. When culture kills, Ionia likes to tell you it is different. A land of harmony, of soft rain on temple roofs and quiet prayers to spirits older than any empire. In a world as wide as Runeterra, it stands as the place that claims balance, while others chase conquest and gold. But balance, enforced at sword point, casts its own kind of shadow. Let us look, not at Yasuo or Yone for a moment, but at the water they were swimming in, the stories whispered into their ears long before a Noxian banner ever crested the horizon. Ionia teaches that every act must fit into a pattern, offense and atonement, wound and healing, dishonor and the clean cut that severs it away. It sounds peaceful. It feels inevitable. It leaves very little room for doubt. When Elder Suma fell, the code did not ask what truly happened. It asked what would restore the story. A master, dead by wind. One student who wielded that wind. One empty post on the wall, where a young swordsman had abandoned his duty. The horror was not only the murder, it was how quickly a whole culture leapt to arrange the pieces into a simple tale. A traitor, a punishment, a restored balance. Where, in that neat script, could Yasuo possibly fit a fair hearing? Now the night is long, so let us begin to see how this simplicity rewarded the brother who stayed inside it. Yone did everything the way Ionia said a good son should. He trained diligently. He respected elders. When the war came, he chose duty over blood and hunted the man everyone agreed was the monster. Each step he took in pursuit of Yasuo was met with nods, with solemn approval, with the quiet reinforcement that honor means never hesitating once the code has spoken. Yet that same unwavering devotion walked him to a duel that would carve his life in two. The blade that pierced his chest was not only Yasuo's, it was sharpened by every elder who told him certainty was a virtue, by every comrade who praised his resolve, while never asking whether the story they believed was true. Even beyond death, as the Azakana's mask fused to his face, Yone did not escape that lesson. He simply traded one kind of hunting for another. Ask yourself, in this tale, where is the true evil? Is it in Yasuo's single moment of disobedience? Or in Yone's relentless obedience? Or in the collective refusal of an entire nation to sit with the unbearable possibility that sometimes there is no clean answer, no pure villain, no ritual that can make grief behave? This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the quieter horror of a people who could not tolerate ambiguity, who rushed to fill the void of not knowing with a convenient lie, and in doing so, turned two brothers into instruments of their fear. Yasuo and Yone are not only victims of each other, they are casualties of a culture that chose certainty over truth. And the most unsettling question still waits in the dark. What happens to a code of honor when the truth finally claws its way back to the surface? Demons in the code. Are Yasuo and Yone evil? When that truth finally surfaces, you and I are left with a quieter, sharper question than any accusation of murder. If the story was built on a lie, does that make either brother evil or only terribly, humanly wrong? In a world as wide as Runeterra, we have said that evil is not a single shadow on a wall. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, sadism in one alley, systemic cruelty in another, cosmic indifference towering above them, and demons whispering from the cracks beneath your feet. So where, if anywhere, do Yasuo and Yone walk in that city? Not down the sadist street. Neither brother takes joy in the scream. Yasuo does not abandon his post because he wishes Elder Suma dead. He runs because he believes, with the arrogance of youth and the terror of war, that his wind is the only shield that might matter. When his master is found cut down by the very technique only he has mastered, the horror is not that he wanted this, but that his intent no longer matters to anyone. Yone, hunting him, does not savor the chase. He is driven, rigid, frightened of what it means if the code he clings to is wrong. Their harm is collateral. It radiates outward from conviction and fear, not from delight in suffering. Yone's blade finds his brother because he cannot imagine a world in which the law, the elders, the temple itself might be mistaken. Yasuo's blade finds Yone because he will not die simply to satisfy that mistake. Two swords cross, and an entire life of shared childhood, of training yards and quiet evenings, is shattered in a single, terrible choice. But if they are not sadists, they are still entangled in a larger, colder evil. Ionia, under invasion, needed a traitor, a war machine, even one that calls itself spiritual, runs more smoothly when blame has a face. The elders, the soldiers, the frightened villagers turning away from Yasuo in the streets, they become a kind of living tribunal, a system that prefers a convenient monster over an uncomfortable mystery. This is not a demon's curse. It is bureaucracy and fear, writing a death sentence in the language of honor. And then, of course, there are the demons. Yone meets an Azakana in the shadowed afterlife, a creature born from human fear, and when he kills it, its mask fuses to his face. He returns as a hunter of such beings, half man, half warning, his very existence proof that the line between person and monster can blur. Yasuo, meanwhile, carries no visible mask, yet you can feel the Azakana of guilt riding his shoulders. Every village he passes, every rumor of the traitor, feeds that inner voice that tells him he deserves the hatred. Here is the pattern interrupt. Perhaps the most frightening thing about their story is not any demon at all. It is how ordinary they are. Two brothers, each trying to do what seems right, crushed between a lie, a war, and expectations they did not choose. Together, we will wander further into that thought, but hold this for now. In Runeterra, the most terrifying monsters may be ordinary people under extraordinary pressure, walking dark streets they never meant to enter, in a city of evil that does not care what they intended. And if that is true, what does it mean for everyone else still living under that same sky? Kin of the Stained Blade, revisited, visualizing tragedy. If ordinary people can become monsters by walking the wrong street, then we should return to a place where two brothers did exactly that. Let us step back into Kin of the Stained Blade, not as dazzled spectators this time, but as quiet witnesses, reading the shadows between each frame. It begins with a cup. Liquid trembling in Yasuo's hand, the world around him blurred by drink and by memory. A simple image, yet it holds the whole horror of his regret. He is trying to drown the wind itself, to soften the edge of the night that never leaves him. The way the camera lingers on his lowered eyes, the slack angle of his shoulders, tells you more than any confession. This is not the stance of a swordsman. It is the posture of a man who has already decided he deserves whatever is coming. Then, Yone approaches. Not with a shout, not with a rush, but with measured, inevitable steps through the rain-soaked street. Short, certain, final. The storm above them is not subtle. The sky opens as if Ionia itself is weeping. Each raindrop a reminder of the blood and blame between them. In a world as wide as Runeterra, weather is rarely just weather. Here, the rain is judgment, the wind is accusation, and the distant thunder is the echo of Elder Suma's last breath. Watch the way they hold their blades when they finally face one another. Yasuo's sword hangs low, almost reluctant to rise, his grip loose, his body turned half away, as if some part of him still hopes this duel might pass him by. Yone's stance is rigid, perfectly aligned, every motion a ritual of duty. He pauses for a heartbeat before drawing, a tiny hesitation that betrays the brother beneath the executioner. That flicker, that almost invisible delay, is the whole tragedy made visible. Intent and love, colliding with the iron cage of honor. Around them, cherry blossoms fall. Soft petals drifting through hard steel. Lost innocence, descending in slow motion over an act that cannot be undone. Each petal is a memory of childhood training yards, of laughter before Noxian banners darkened the horizon, of a time when honor meant protecting each other, not choosing which one must die. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a quiet horror, where beauty keeps falling, even as brothers cut each other down. Notice, too, the glances that never quite meet. Yasuo's eyes slide away, as if he cannot bear to see the monster Yone believes he is. Yone's gaze locks like a blade, but wavers for a breath when Yasuo calls his name. Together, we will wander through those tiny fractures, the half step back before the killing blow, the way Yone's hand trembles once the deed is done, the way the wind still cradles Yasuo rather than strike him. Honor, guilt, fate. Riot lets the environment speak them aloud. Now the night is long, so let us begin a small task when this story ends. Rewatch Kin of the Stained Blade after you know the full tale of Yasuo and Yone. You will see new layers in every frame, new ghosts in every raindrop. And perhaps you will ask yourself one last quiet question. Was it really the brothers who chose this path? Or the city of darkness around them that left them nowhere else to walk? Yone the Demon Hunter. Justice or self-punishment? We have watched Yone die once already, cut down by the brother he swore to bring to justice, only to wake in a place of red mist and whispering teeth. Now the night is long, so let us begin again, not with his death, but with the work he chose afterward. In a world as wide as Runeterra, Yone's present existence has narrowed to a single, razor-thin purpose. He moves through Ionia's forests and forgotten villages like an unsheathed verdict, a wandering executioner who listens for a particular kind of silence, the silence left behind when an Azakana has fed. You find him in the margins of other people's stories, a shadow on a rooftop, a figure in a shrine doorway. And when his twin blades cross, something unseen dies screaming. On the surface, this looks noble. Demons that feast on doubt and obsession are an evil that few even recognize, much less have the will to face. But if you watch closely, you may notice how rarely Yone speaks of saving anyone. He tracks these lesser demons the way a penitent retraces the path to the scene of a crime, killing, moving on, killing again, as if each Azakana were one more chance to redo the moment he failed Yasuo, failed Suma, failed himself. Every hunt is a reenactment. The Azakana that first attacked him in death was born from his own rigid honor and festering hatred. When he slew it and its mask clamped to his face, he did not escape that horror. He institutionalized it. Now, with each demon he cuts down, he is really striking at a reflection, another distorted shard of the monster that once grew fat on his certainty. How many times can you relive your worst mistake before the ritual becomes its own quiet form of suffering? Listen to how he speaks to others. With Yasuo, there is no triumphant reunion, only a careful distance. A man who has learned the truth, yet cannot quite step out of the role of executioner. With strangers, he is courteous, restrained, almost gentle. But there is always one more duty, one more trail of spiritual rot to follow. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. And Yone walks them, so he does not have to walk back into the room where his brother is waiting. At the center of it all sits the mask. Is it a curse, dragging him from hunt to hunt, or a mirror that merely shows him the depth of his own need for punishment? The Azakana's voice needles him, tempts him, but it also names the fears in those he pursues, just as it once named his own. Does it control him, or does it simply give form to what was always there? A man who cannot forgive himself, and so chooses a life where forgiveness is never required. Together, we will wander one step further and ask a final quiet question. If Yone ever truly forgave himself and Yasuo, would he still be able to hear the demons he hunts? Or would the mask fall silent at last, leaving him alone with a different kind of void? Yasuo the Drifter, running from or toward redemption. So now we find him not in a temple or a dueling ring, but on the road, a nameless path. A man who prefers to stay that way. In a world as wide as Runeterra, Yasuo's life has shrunk to small, easily abandoned moments. A shared drink here, a bandit scattered there, a village storm broken by a single, cutting gust of wind, and then the wind moves on. Imagine him in some roadside inn, hat tilted low, sake bottle half empty, listening more than speaking. He helps when he can, almost despite himself. A cart righted with a lazy flick of air. A bully disarmed before anyone quite sees him move. Then, before thanks can harden into memory, he is gone. Boots already carrying him toward the next horizon, as if roots themselves were a kind of enemy. Outwardly, he plays the roguish wanderer well, the drifting swordsman, quick with a wry remark, quicker still with his blade. To strangers, he is a story waiting to be told. The mysterious master of wind who appears in the night, defeats the monster, and leaves before dawn. But the true horror of Yasuo is not in what he fights. It is in what he refuses to face. Behind that easy smile is a man who has never stopped replaying a single decision. The moment he abandoned his post, the breath between choosing his master and choosing his duty, the instant where Yone's path bent toward death. He calls himself cursed, and he believes it. That self-image is not decoration, it is armor. If you are cursed, then every attachment is a future wound, every friendship a promise of new suffering. So he keeps his steps light and his ties lighter. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow, deliberate retreat from anything that might demand he forgive himself. The law leaves us little islands of possibility, and he keeps sailing past them. Talia offers him companionship and trust. He teaches her, protects her, then pushes her away, insisting the shadow that follows him is too dangerous to share. In Ionia, there are those willing to hear his side of the story, to question the neat tale of a traitor who killed his master with the very wind he was taught. Yet Yasuo rarely lingers long enough to let their doubts become absolution. Even when Yone returns from death, mask of an Azakana upon his face and truth in his voice, Yasuo flinches from the full weight of that forgiveness, like a man burned too many times by hope. Pattern interrupt then. What if his wandering is not a punishment, but a shield? If he keeps moving, he never has to stand in one place long enough for redemption to find him. Because if it did, if Yorna's ghost finally fell silent, if Elder Suma's memory ceased accusing him in the quiet hours, what would be left of the man who has built his whole identity on guilt and exile? Together, we will wander one step further and ask, when the road finally ends, will Yasuo lay down his sword or discover that the real void he fears is a life without the shadow of his sins? When brothers meet, again, tension in the present day. So imagine for a moment that the ghost finally does speak. Not as a whisper in Yasuo's dreams, but as a man stepping out of the mist. A brother he buried with his own blade. Let the night lean in a little closer, and picture a clearing on some forgotten Ionian hillside, where the wind carries the smell of wet earth and old regrets. Yasuo walks alone, as he always has, until he feels it, a familiar pressure in the air, like the pause before a storm. He turns, and there is Yone, alive, and yet not, a figure in lacquered armor, a demon's mask hanging where a human face should be. The shock is not loud, it is quiet, suffocating, the kind of horror that steals words instead of screams. Yasuo's hand goes to his sword. Yone's fingers rest on his own hilt. Between them, the wind stirs dust and fallen leaves. And in that small, circling storm lives every question they never asked. How are you here? Why did you come? Do I draw first? Or do I kneel? Yone knows more now. In the moment of his death, he believed he was striking down a traitor. In the spirit realm, hunted by an Azakana and forced to wear its mask, he learned the truth of Suma's murder, the twisted path of Noxian intent, the way evil can hide in convenient assumptions. Knowledge is a blade, but it is not a salve. It cuts away lies. It does not stitch years of grief back together. So he stands before Yasuo with two truths in his hands. My brother did not kill our master, and my brother killed me. Which wound do you forgive first? For Yasuo, the sight is a miracle wrapped in a curse. Yone is alive, yet changed, bound to a mission that seems to have nothing to do with him. hunting demons, reading the shadows of human suffering, and at the same time has everything to do with him, because Yasuo himself has become one of those shadows. Every step Yone takes toward understanding Azakana is also a step toward understanding the monster he once believed his brother to be. Their words, when they come, are careful, sheathed in formality. Apologies half-spoken, accusations half-swallowed. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors, and they are afraid that opening any one of them will lead straight back to drawn steel. You can feel it, can you not? Each glance is a duel. Each silence is a wound. Together we will wander that knife's edge with them. On one side, reconciliation. Two warriors accepting that duty, honor, and even love can be warped by war. On the other, renewed conflict. The temptation to say, "You ruined my life," and let the wind answer with blood. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. The scariest thing here is slower, softer, more human. It is the work of forgiveness. In a world as wide as Runeterra, blades can be reforged in a single heartbeat, but hearts are slower. Their story is still being written, stroke by hesitant stroke, in every meeting where Yone's mask tilts just so, and Yasuo's hand almost leaves the hilt. And somewhere ahead lies a question neither sword can settle. When the killing is done, who will they be to each other? If not executioner and condemned? Honor, redefined. What the brothers have learned. Honor used to be a straight line between them, a single path, drawn in steel and expectation. Now it is a crossroads in the dark, with no clear signposts, only the echo of choices they can never unmake. And let us look at what their suffering has carved into that once simple word, honor. Yone was the elder, the dutiful blade. For him, honor began and ended in obedience, to their village, to their masters, to Ionia's old codes that said, a sworn protector never leaves his post, no matter what storm gathers on the horizon. When Elder Suma was found dead, cut down by wind, the logic was merciless. Yasuo alone knew the technique. Therefore, Yasuo was the monster. Therefore, Yone's duty was clear. He hunted his brother across a world of temples and battlefields, never asking whether the story he had been given was true, only whether he was strong enough to finish it. That rigid intent is what carried him into their final duel, and it is what got him killed. His last breath was spent not on understanding, but on accusation. And then the horror deepened. In the spirit realm, Yone met an Azakana, a quiet thing that fed on the cracks in his certainty, on guilt and rage and the shadow of that unforgivable lie. He killed it, but its mask fused to his face, turning him into a hunter of demons, both in the world and within himself. Now, when he confronts an Azakana born from someone's secret fear, he is forced to ask the question he never asked Yasuo. What if the crime is not as simple as it seems? Yasuo's path twisted in the opposite direction. Where Yone clung to the law, Yasuo fled it. He broke ranks to save Elder Suma, trusting his heart over his orders, and lost everything. The master died. The war raged on. His choice, made in desperate love, birthed years of exile, branded him traitor, and drew Yone's blade to his throat. Following the heart without regard for consequence, he learned, can be as destructive as blind obedience. You can hear that lesson in his quieter moments. In his reunion with Talia, where he hesitates to train another, knowing how easily a student can become a weapon. In his meeting with Yone after the ruination, where instead of demanding forgiveness, he simply offers the truth and waits, as if any verdict would be fair. Together, we will wander that thin line they now share. They live between Ionia's old codes and a new, painful morality written in blood and regret, where duty is no longer to a creed, but to the living people their blades might save or doom. In a world as wide as Runeterra, this is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is the slow horror of realizing that no oath can undo what you have already done. If there is redemption for them, it is not in erasing the past, but in refusing to let those old rigid definitions of honor script their future kills. The real question, as the shadows ahead grow thicker, is simple and terrible. When the next impossible choice comes, which brother will break his new code first, and what will that cost? The quiet horror of what if, alternate paths, untaken, and beneath that question, another waits, quieter and more unsettling. How little would it have taken for none of this to happen at all? Let us step, just for a moment, into the soft horror of what if. In a world as wide as Runeterra, evil is not always a roaring monster at the gate. Sometimes it is a door that never opened, a word that was never spoken, a brother who arrived 5 minutes too late. Imagine Yasuo on that rain-slick courtyard, the Noxian invasion pressing at the horizon, the wind restless around his blade. He feels the pull to run to Elder Suma, to be the lone shield against the storm. But in this version, he does not move. He obeys. He stays at his post. The night is still bloody, the enemy still cruel. Yet when the dust settles, Suma lives long enough to speak, to say clearly and publicly that Yasuo's intent was never betrayal. One sentence, one old man's voice. The entire story bends. Or picture the same night with only a single change. Suma still falls, but does not die alone. A healer reaches him. A disciple finds him. He whispers, with his last ragged breath, that the wind which killed him was not Yasuo's. The accusation never hardens into certainty. The hunt never begins. Yone never spends years walking from village to village with his brother's name like a wound in his mouth. Now, turn the lantern. Look at Yone instead. It is a whole city of darkness with many streets and many doors, and he stands before one of them when he hears the official story. Suma, slain by wind. Yasuo, fled his duty. In the tale we know, he chooses the door marked duty and steps through into suffering. But there is another door, the one where he says simply, I will hear my brother first. One conversation, one night by a shared fire. Perhaps he still condemns Yasuo. Perhaps he does not. Yet the blade stays sheathed, and the cycle of death never begins. This is the quiet horror at the heart of their story. Not a void rending the sky, not some grand cosmic darkness descending, but the realization that everything hinged on small human moments. A commander's phrasing, a brother's doubt, a single question, asked one heartbeat sooner. No great demon of intent stalked them. The evil was ordinary certainty, the refusal to pause, to listen, to wonder, what if I am wrong? This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a walk through your own corridors of choice. Somewhere in your life, there is a post you abandoned, or a story you accepted without question, or a conversation you never quite managed to have. Which unseen threads did those decisions tug in the lives around you, and which shadows, even now, are still moving because of them? 4 shadows over Ionia, mapping their story onto Evil City. So let us step back, just for a moment, from the brothers themselves, and look again at the city of evil we have been mapping. In a world as wide as Runeterra, darkness does not wear only one face. It is a whole city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. You remember the 4 main avenues we walked earlier. There is the narrow alley of personal sadism, where monsters like Thresh and Evelyn savor individual suffering. There is the broad imperial road of systemic cruelty, paved by Noxus and its generals, where signatures and strategies bury nations. There is the cold, starless boulevard of cosmic indifference, where the void and beings like Vel'Koz unmake reality without hatred, only curiosity. And there is the twisting lane of demonic temptation, where Tam Kench, Raum, and their kin feed on human weakness and whispered desire. Now let us ask, on which street do Yasuo and Yone walk? Their story begins not with a demon, but with an empire. The Noxian invasion of Ionia is imperial evil in its pure form. Soldiers marching under banners of unity, commanders speaking of strength, while villages burn and sacred groves bleed. When the war reaches the quiet halls where Elder Suma teaches, the brothers are already inside a machine much larger than themselves. Yasuo's fateful choice, to abandon his post and try to save his master, happens under that pressure. The accusation that follows, the rigid Ionian response that brands him traitor and murderer because the wind killed Suma, and only he knew that art, is systemic cruelty of another kind. Not Noxian this time, but the cruelty of a culture so bound to form and tradition that it would rather condemn than question. What happens when honor itself becomes a kind of blindfold? Then the shadows narrow. Yone's hunt is not an imperial campaign. It is a pilgrimage into a more intimate horror. He chases Yasuo across a wounded land, driven by a strict, unbending vision of duty, until brother faces brother and Yasuo's blade ends him. In death, Yone meets an Azakana, a lesser demon drawn to the cracks in his soul, to his obsession, to the rigid guilt and rage that would not bend. He kills it, but its mask fuses to his face. He returns as a hunter of such creatures, yet forever bound to one, because there is another demon here as well, the one that never needed a mask. Yasuo's inner torment, his refusal to forgive himself, is a quiet, patient monster that whispers he deserves every exile, every lonely road. The Azakana outside and the self-hatred within are 2 mirrors facing each other, reflecting temptation and corruption back and forth. They are not cosmic horrors like the Void. They do not threaten to erase Shurima's ruins or Ionia's forests from existence. Their suffering is smaller, human-sized, but it is a counterpart to that vast indifference. Where the Void annihilates without intent, Yasuo and Yone are annihilated by intent misdirected, by conviction turned inward like a blade. Together, we will wander these crossings and see that their tale stands where streets meet, at the junction of systemic and demonic evil, an empire's war, a nation's rigidity, and 2 men's unresolved guilt weave a tragedy in which the worst monsters do not cackle in the dark. They speak in the language of honor, duty, and promises you make to yourself and cannot bear to break. And just beyond this corner, another door waits. What becomes of a man who keeps walking with that weight on his shoulders? No jump. Scarce here. A moment to breathe. What becomes of a man who keeps walking with that weight on his shoulders? Let the question drift to the edge of the flame for a moment. You are not in a dueling circle. You are not standing between Noxian steel and Ionian soil. You are here, in the quiet, listening to stories that have already reached their end. The brothers have already drawn their blades. Yone has already fallen once. Yasuo has already walked the long road of exile, every step echoing with Elder Suma's last breath. Nothing you do now will change what has been written. And in that certainty, there is a strange kind of safety. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. The worst has already happened, so no sudden twists wait in the dark beyond the firelight. Only the slow settling of ash, the soft work of understanding. The duel is over. The verdicts have been passed. We are only tracing the outlines left behind. If you walked Ionia now, you would see their choices etched into the land. A ruined temple, where Elder Suma once taught the wind, its training post split cleanly in two by a technique only one student truly mastered. A drowned palace, half swallowed by reeds and river mist, where Noxian banners once fluttered and Yasuo first learned that duty can pull you one way, while love drags you another. An abandoned training yard on the outskirts of a village, wooden swords rotting, where two boys once argued about honor, laughing before either knew what real suffering would cost. These are only stones and water and old wood. Yet in a world as wide as Rune Terror, such places become vessels for memory. A cracked flagstone remembers the day Yasuo turned his back on his post. A moss-covered gate remembers the first time Yone called his brother traitor and believed it. The landscape itself becomes a quiet witness, holding the shadow of every decision long after the men who made them have moved on. As you sit here, notice what lingers for you. Is it the image of Yone waking in the spirit realm, with an Azakana's mask pressed to his face? The moment Yasuo's blade found his brother's heart? Or something smaller? A shared lesson beneath a cherry tree? A promise of protection that the night could not keep? Which part made your shoulders tense, and which, unexpectedly, felt like a release? Here is the small pattern break I will offer you. This is no longer only their story. It brushes against yours. Together, we will wander a little further into that thought, where in this tapestry of honor, guilt, and love, do you find yourself standing? As judge, as exile, as brother, or as something far more complicated than any of those words can hold? Which shadow haunts you? A question for the listener. So let me ask you, here in this pause, where the steel has finally stopped singing, which part of this story will not quite let you go? Not as a point to argue, but as a small stone in your shoe that you keep feeling, step after step. Look with me at the four shadows that have walked beside Yasuo and Yone since they were boys in Ionia's training yards. Perhaps it is Yasuo's abandonment that troubles you most. A single choice, leaving his post, running through the rain to save Elder Suma, only to find a corpse carved by wind. A guard who was not at his station, a student who failed his master, a man whose intent was love, and whose outcome was horror. If that is the shadow that bites at you, maybe you fear the evil of personal betrayal, the moment when someone, or you yourself, simply was not there when it mattered. Or perhaps it is Yone's unforgiveness that feels sharper. Years spent hunting his own brother across a wounded world, blade drawn, heart locked, certain that honor could only be satisfied with blood. He dies with Yasuo's sword in his chest, and the lie still unchallenged. If that is the wound you cannot quite look at, then maybe the monster that haunts you is not an Azakana at all, but the rigid voice that cannot bend, the part of you that would rather break a bond than admit you might be wrong. Maybe it is Ionia itself that disturbs you, a land of meditation and balance, so certain in its code that the only logical suspect must be the guilty one. No trial, no patience. A whole culture moving like a single blade, cutting down a man because the pattern of evidence fits too neatly. In a world as wide as Runeterra, this is the evil of systems and stories, the quiet violence of institutions that decide who is monster and who is martyr with a stroke of ink. Or is it the Azakana that truly chills you? That small, hungry thing waiting for Yone in the spirit realm, whispering his own shame back to him, feeding on the guilt he carried like armor. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. This is the evil of inner demons, of soft, persistent voices that know every secret corridor of your doubt. Which shadow feels closest to home? Have you been too harsh with yourself, like Yone? Too quick to walk away, like Yasuo? Too eager to accept the simple story about a complex night because it was easier than sitting with uncertainty? Together, we will wander a little further. But before we do, I invite you, quietly, to answer in the comments, not to debate, not to judge, but to leave one small confession in the ashes here. Which shadow haunts you? Team Yasuo or Team Yone? Choosing a side in a broken story. If that last question still lingers in you, then you are ready for the next one, sharper and more uncomfortable. Not which shadow haunts you, but if you had to stand beside one brother on that blood-slick night, whose side would you take? Let the flames be our dueling ground, the sparks our blades. People like to whisper #Team Yasuo and #Team Yone, as if they were simple banners to wave, mere decorations in a quiet war of favorites. But in a world as wide as Runeterra, those names become something heavier. They are not just about which sword you prefer, but about which instinct rules you when the darkness presses in, the heart that runs to the one it loves, or the duty that stays where it is sworn. Yasuo is the heart-first path. He abandons his post because he believes, with a young man's desperate certainty, that only he can save Elder Suma. His crime begins with good intent. The horror comes later, when the Elder is found dead by wind technique. And the very gift that made Yasuo special becomes the noose around his neck. Hunted as a traitor, he wanders through the night, carrying a burden you can almost feel in your own ribs. Every village he passes, every whisper of his name, another stone in the sack of guilt he refuses to set down. To stand with him is to say, I believe the system failed him. You see an Ionian order so rigid that it would rather condemn a frightened prodigy than admit its own blindness. You see a man whose entire life becomes a form of penance, each duel, each lonely road, an attempt to pay for a crime he did not commit, but half believes he deserves. Yone is the duty-first path. When the elder dies, he does not chase rumors or feelings. He chases the oath he has wrapped around his own throat. Yasuo flees, so Yone hunts. For years, he follows the trail, not because he enjoys the suffering it brings, but because he cannot imagine a world where honor bends. In the end, he forces the fatal duel and pays with his life. That too is a kind of sacrifice. And then the pattern breaks. Death does not free him. And as Akana claws at his soul in the shadowed realm, he kills it, wears its mask, and returns changed. The monster he hunts now is not his brother, but the twisted intent that feeds on human weakness. Slowly, painfully, he confronts the possibility that his own rigid honor was part of the horror that destroyed them both. So, Team Yasuo or Team Yone? Or do you refuse the choice, seeing instead two tragic figures walking different streets in the same city of darkness, pushed by war, lies, and the quiet void between what they meant and what they did? In the comments, choose your side if you dare, but tell me why. Not which design you favor, not which blade feels cooler in the hand, but which story of intent, guilt, and duty you find yourself defending when the night grows long. And keep that answer close, because soon we will test it against what truly waited behind Elder Suma's death. Beyond good and evil, what the brothers teach about war. So let us test it now, against the night that changed everything. The Noxian invasion did not arrive as a philosophy. It arrived as steel on soil, as fire in temple gardens, as soldiers trampling the quiet courtyards where Yasuo once raked leaves, and Yone's corrected his stance. In peace, honor is a story you debate over tea. In war, it is the difference between drawing your blade and watching someone die while you hesitate. Imagine being a young disciple, told all your life that duty is clear, that masters are wise, that your role in the world has been written for you like a careful calligraphy scroll. Then the walls shake, the sky fills with burning arrows, and the one man who ever believed in you is somewhere out there in the chaos. Do you hold the gate, or do you run to him? How certain are you in that instant that the rules still apply? War compresses time. A long, thoughtful investigation becomes a heartbeat. A counsel becomes a glance. Mercy becomes a luxury you cannot afford. Yasuo abandons his post because the horror outside feels more urgent than the honor inside. And by the time the storm settles, Elder Suma is dead. The wind itself has cut him down, and every eye turns toward the only student who ever mastered that technique. There is no patient inquiry, no careful weighing of intent, only a verdict delivered at sword point. Now the night is long, so let us begin to name what that does to people. Yone, who once tried to be the steady brother, becomes an avenger because the story he is handed, traitor, murderer, coward, is too simple and too satisfying to refuse. If Yasuo is the monster, then Yone's suffering has a shape, and his rage has a purpose. He hunts not just a man, but a narrative that promises to make the world make sense again. Yasuo, in turn, accepts the mask of traitor, because arguing feels pointless when every track in the dust leads back to him. His guilt, his grief, his fear all harden into a single identity, the wanderer who does not deserve a home. Together, we will wander through so many tales like this, where trauma is not just a wound, but a script, whispered so often, it becomes the only voice you hear. In a world as wide as Runeterra, this is one of war's quietest evils. It does not only kill bodies, it warps stories. It takes brothers and recasts them as executioner and quarry, then lets that lie echo for years, for generations, until even the dead, like Yone reborn with an Azakana's mask, must unlearn who they thought they were. The true horror is not only that Elder Suma died, but that an entire nation's fear turned two good men into instruments of harm, simply because certainty felt safer than doubt. And if that can happen in one temple courtyard, under one storm of arrows, how many other names, in how many other wars, are still trapped inside the wrong story? Listening to the wind, how to carry this story with you. So let us step for a moment out of that courtyard and into your own quiet corridors. The arrows have stopped. The shouting is gone. All that remains is you, moving through a world that is rarely as simple as hero and villain, and yet so eager to name them. In a world as wide as Runeterra, it is tempting to sort people the way Ionia sorted Yasuo. One act, one rumor, one piece of circumstantial wind, and the verdict hardens into stone. A friend disappoints you. A stranger cuts in front of you. A leader makes a choice you hate. It is so easy to feel the old story rise up. Traitor, coward, monster. But you almost never hold the whole tale in your hands when you decide who wears which mask. When that urge appears, I would ask you to remember the wind. You do not see it, and yet you feel its pull on your cloak. Hear it in the trees. Watch it carve waves on the sea. In the same way, you do not see the unseen motives and pressures that bend another person's path. The fear that drove Yasuo from his post. The duty that chained Yone to the hunt. The invisible currents of grief, expectation, and terror that turned brothers into each other's doom. Think of the last time you clung to a principle so tightly that there was no room left for a person inside it. Perhaps you insisted on being right in an argument, even when you could feel a relationship fraying. Perhaps you stayed silent to keep the peace, even as resentment coiled like an Azakana in the corner of the room. Yasuo chose the living master over the written rule. Yone chose the written rule over the living brother. Each paid in suffering. Which way do you lean when the night presses in? Their story can be a small, cautionary whisper at the edge of your thoughts. Ask questions sooner. Speak honestly before swords are drawn. Be suspicious of any tale that demands a single, perfect culprit. If an entire nation could be wrong about one man with a sword and a gust of wind, how certain should you be about the colleague, the stranger, the family member you have already condemned in your heart? This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow ward against a subtler horror. The tragedies that begin not with blades, but with silence and certainty. If this story lingers with you, let it be a small protective charm. A reminder to listen for the unseen wind in other lives before you name the evil in them. Together, we will wander a little further into that darkness in the next part and see what becomes of two men who must now live with what the storm has made of them. From campfire to keyboard, your place in Runeterra's myths. So now we have followed them through storm and steel, through accusation and the quiet, choking certainty that someone must be the monster. Yet their story is not a sealed tomb. It is a door left slightly open, a lantern still burning in the wind. In a world as wide as Runeterra, these tales do not end when the page closes or the match ends. They keep moving, changing shape in the darkness just beyond the campfire's reach. League's lore is not a single scroll nailed to a temple wall, finished and forgotten. It is a living tapestry, threads added and pulled loose with every new cinematic, every short story, every offhand line when Yasuo meets Yone on the rift, and the air itself seems to hold its breath. One year you see two brothers in a fatal duel. Another year you see a demon's mask, an Azakana's whisper, and you realize the horror was never as simple as one man's evil. Think back over everything you know of them. Not the grand duel, not the headline that Yasuo killed his brother, but the small, almost throwaway moments. A childhood lesson in Ionia's gardens. The way Yone's voice tightens when he speaks of duty. The exact instant in a cinematic when Yasuo's hand trembles on his sword hilt, and then, with terrible intent, does not. Is there one image, one line, one quiet look between them that you carry with you, that you feel others have simply walked past? If there is, leave it here, like a small stone by the path, so others can find it. Because this is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow circling around suffering and forgiveness, around what we call justice when the night is long and no witnesses remain. In the comments, if you wish, I invite you to sit with a harder question. How could Ionia have answered Suma's death without turning brother against brother? What might true forgiveness between Yasuo and Yone actually look like, if it were not wrapped in spectacle and steel, but in halting words and long silences? I ask only that you step into that shadow gently. Speak of it with the same care you would offer a real grieving family, because these stories, for all their spirits and void-born horrors, are still mirrors held up to us. Here, I would like this channel to be a recurring campfire, a place you can return to when new lore arrives, when another cinematic shifts a single line and the whole pattern of their lives looks different. Together, we will wander back to these moments, not to rush through them, but to sit, to watch, to listen. When you add your thoughts, your questions, even your disagreements, you help keep these quieter threads from being swallowed by the roar of battles and bright explosions. You keep alive the uneasy pause before a blade is drawn, the doubt in Yone's eyes, the wind around Yasuo's shoulders. Stay a while longer, and in the next part, we will follow where their paths lead after death itself fails to end their story. If you'd like more stories, a gentle invitation, you are still here. Through wind and steel and all this quiet suffering, you have carried the story with me to this point. And in a world as wide as Runeterra, that kind of attention is rarer than any enchanted blade. You could have turned away at any moment. Instead, you chose to sit with two brothers who could not forgive themselves. So, first, let me honor that. In a night full of noise, you have given me something fragile and precious. Your time, your focus, your willingness to look at evil and tragedy without flinching. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow walk through shadow, where we listen for the small, uncomfortable truths hiding behind every clash of swords. If you find that this slower, campfire way of moving through horror has been a kind of shelter, you are welcome to stay. You can, if you wish, Add your name to this little circle by subscribing, not as a pledge to watch everything, but as a quiet signal that you want more long-form, atmospheric stories told at this gentler pace, where we follow intent as carefully as outcome. Together, we will wander not only through Ionia's broken fields and haunted dojos, but through other corners of the map where different monsters wait. There are demons who feed on hunger and despair, warlords who turn entire nations into grinding machines of conquest, and things from the void that do not hate us, only study us as they erase. If tonight's tale of brothers and twisted honor settled into you, there are other threads we can follow. Perhaps next you might walk with Yone a little farther, into the realm of Azakana, where lesser demons cling to unspoken fears and half-formed regrets. Or you might prefer to cross the sea, into Noxus, to sit in the war rooms where men like Swain and his unseen patrons in the Black Rose decide which city will burn next. Or deeper still, into the Shadow Isles, where Thresh's lantern and Mordekaiser's iron necropolis show two very different ways to build a kingdom out of unending night. Which path calls to you most? If you choose to like this video, or to share it with someone else who might need a quiet story to fall asleep to, think of it as placing another log on the fire. A small act, a simple motion, yet the circle of light grows a little wider. The darkness pushes back a few more steps, and someone far away may find this tale waiting when their own night feels too long. And if you simply wish to listen, unseen and unnamed, that is welcome too. Allow the night to grow a little deeper. In the next part, we will follow Yasuo and Yone beyond Death's Edge to see what remains when every sword has finally fallen silent. Embers and echoes. One last look at the brothers. So let us pause with them, here, at the edge of all things, and look back, one last time. Two brothers. One homeland. A single, splintering choice. In a world as wide as Runeterra, their story is only one thread in the tapestry of war and wandering spirits, yet it clings to the mind like the echo of steel in the rain. Together, we will wander back to where it began. Two boys in peaceful Ionia, running stone paths beneath cherry trees, a stern master watching, wooden swords striking in careful patterns. Before the Noxian banners, before the accusations, there was only discipline, rivalry, and a quiet love. Neither of them knew how to speak aloud. Then the world shifted. A war rolled in like a dark tide, and duty hardened around them. Yasuo, the only disciple to master Elder Suma's wind technique, was chained to an empty guard post, while his heart pulled toward the battlefield. Yone, older, stricter, believed in rules that did not bend. One night, Yasuo turned his back on that lonely gate, chasing a desperate hope that he alone might save his master. At dawn, there was a corpse. Elder Suma, cut down by the very wind he had taught. There was a village of whispers, a neat line of logic, and a name that fit too well. Yasuo became traitor, murderer, monster. Yone became hunter, judge, executioner. Each brother lost something in that moment. They simply bled in different ways. Yasuo lost his home first, then his honor, and finally his sense of self, drifting from tavern to temple with only the hiss of his sword and the memory of an empty post for company. Yone lost his trust, then his brother, and at last his life, collapsing in a courtyard where the rain tried and failed to wash the blood from the stones. Their duel killed more than just a man. It slew a childhood, shattered a family, and carved a wound into Ionia's already torn spirit. Yet death was not an ending. In the shadowed realm beyond, an Azakana found Yone, a pale, hungry thing born from resentment and rigid honor, its mask a smooth, watching void. When he struck it down, the mask did not vanish. It clung to his face, a new burden, a reminder that he had become both hunter and haunted. Neither brother is purely victim or villain. This is the quiet horror of their tale. Yasuo's intent was never evil, yet his choice opened the door to years of suffering. Yone's devotion to duty was sincere, yet it drove him to a fratricide he could never take back. They are human, flawed, standing in a world that offered no safe choices, only different shapes of regret. So when you next lock in Yasuo or Yone, listen for them. In every dash of wind, in every measured cut, there is an empty guard post, a night of falling rain, and the weight of an Azakana's mask watching from the corner of the screen, waiting to remind you that some ghosts swing the blade with you. Until the next night, extinguishing the fire, waiting to remind you that some ghosts swing the blade with you. And now, if you listen past even that, you can hear something else. Not steel, not rain. Just the soft crackle of our own little fire, burning lower than before. Its light a thin gold circle, in a much larger night. Around us the woods grow quiet, as if Ionia herself has stepped back into the realm of stories, and left only silhouettes behind. In a world as wide as Runeterra, these tales of brothers and blades, of honor and regret, are only a few embers in an endless darkness, yet they glow more sharply because you chose to stay. You walked through the duel. You watched the mask descend. You stayed for the suffering and for the silence that followed it. So I will say this to you plainly, without flourish. Thank you for remaining through a long, heavy tale. See, not every story in this world bends toward a happy ending. Some bend toward a necessary one, where the horror is not a monster in the void, but a choice made with good intent that still goes terribly wrong. Yasuo's wind, Yone's blade, the Azakana's whispering mask. None of them grant easy peace. Yet you sat with them until the echoes faded. If the details begin to blur when you close your eyes, the order of battles, the names of masters, the exact moment the killing stroke landed, that is all right. Stories are not tests you must pass. Let them soften at the edges. Let the sharp images sink back into the shadow. If all that remains is a feeling of two brothers circling the same wound, or a single lesson about how rigid honor can cut as deep as any sword, that is more than enough to carry with you into your own quiet life. This is not a journey of jump scares or frantic battles. It is a slow walk along the tree line, lantern in hand, stopping now and then to look into the dark and ask, what lives there, and why? We have held that lantern over Yasuo and Yone for a while, watched their faces, traced the lines of guilt and duty and love across their features. But even the clearest light must be allowed to dim. So, if you are willing, join me in one last small ritual. Imagine the lantern between us, the one we have used to see into this corner of Ionia, its glass smudged with the breath of our questions. Together, we will wander back from the edge of the path, draw in a slow breath, and gently blow. The flame gutters. The shapes retreat. The brothers step back into the realm of stories, where they can rest until we call for them again. The stars above our imagined camp grow brighter as the fire shrinks to coals, and the forest becomes only a suggestion at the edge of your awareness. The world of champions and empires, of evil and honor and broken oaths, recedes to a comfortable distance, like a book closed and set upon a shelf. You are here, in the quiet. The night is yours again. When you are ready, you may return, and we will light this lantern anew for another walk through Runeterra's shadows. Another city of darkness, with many streets and many doors. For now, let the last sparks fade. Let your thoughts uncoil, and allow the night to grow a little deeper around you. Rest well, summoner.